Polar Bear Storms, Arctic Research Station, December 22, 2024. The howling wind across the Chukchi Sea carried with it the scent of death and desperation on the morning of December 22, 2024, though none of the 12 souls huddled within the Barrow Arctic Research Station could have known that their carefully orchestrated scientific mission would transform into a nightmare that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Dr. Karen Olson pressed her frost-covered face against the reinforced triple-pane window of Laboratory Module C, watching the endless expanse of white that stretched toward the horizon where the pale December sun hung like a dying ember barely 3 degrees above the Arctic Ocean. At 38 years old, Karen had dedicated her entire adult life to understanding the intricate relationships between climate change and polar bear behavior, never imagining that her expertise would soon become a matter of life and death in the most visceral way possible. The Barrow Arctic Research Station, officially designated as BARS-7 by the National Science Foundation, stood like a metallic island amid the frozen wasteland 23 miles northeast of Utqiagvik, Alaska, the northernmost settlement in the United States. The facility consisted of 7 interconnected modules arranged in a hexagonal pattern around a central common area, each structure elevated 4 feet above the permafrost on reinforced steel pylons designed to withstand the brutal Arctic conditions that could see temperatures plummet to -60 degrees Fahrenheit and winds exceed 90 miles per hour. The exterior walls were constructed of triple-layered insulated panels with an inner core of polyurethane foam sandwiched between sheets of aircraft-grade aluminum, while the windows were made of impact-resistant polycarbonate, capable of withstanding the force of wind-driven ice chunks the size of bowling balls. Dr. Karen Marie Olson had arrived at BARS-7 on December 15th as the lead researcher for a groundbreaking study funded by a $3 million grant from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Born in Fairbanks to a family of subsistence hunters who had taught her to read the subtle signs of wildlife behavior from childhood, Karen had earned her doctorate in Arctic ecology from the University of Alaska Fairbanks before completing postdoctoral research at the prestigious Polar Research Institute in Norway. Her current project involved tracking the feeding patterns and territorial behaviors of polar bears in response to the rapidly diminishing sea ice, using a combination of satellite telemetry, genetic sampling, and behavioral observation techniques that required her team to spend the entire winter in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. The research station's current population included Dr. Marcus Chen, a 42-year-old climatologist from Stanford University, whose weathered hands bore the scars of 15 years conducting fieldwork in extreme environments, from Antarctica to the Greenland ice sheet. Marcus had joined Karen's team specifically because of his expertise in ice formation patterns and his ability to predict weather systems with uncanny accuracy, skills that had saved research expeditions on 3 separate occasions when sudden storms threatened to trap teams in the field. His thick black hair had begun showing streaks of premature grey from years of stress and extreme cold exposure, and his dark eyes held the steady confidence of a man who had learned to read the Arctic's moods like pages in a familiar book. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, 29 years old and fresh from completing her doctorate in marine biology at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, represented the newest generation of Arctic researchers who combined traditional field techniques with cutting-edge technology. Sarah's specialty involved analyzing the stomach contents and dietary preferences of polar bears through non-invasive genetic sampling of scat and prey remains, work that required her to spend long hours in the field identifying and cataloguing the remnants of seal kills and other feeding sites. Her auburn hair was perpetually tied back in a practical ponytail beneath her insulated hood, and her green eyes sparkled with the enthusiasm of a scientist experiencing her first extended Arctic deployment. The station's support staff included James Rodriguez, a 35-year-old former Army medic who had transitioned to civilian life as a wilderness emergency medical technician after serving 3 tours in Afghanistan. James served as both the facility's medical officer and maintenance supervisor, responsible for keeping the complex life support systems operational in conditions that could kill an unprepared person within minutes of exposure. His stocky frame and steady hands had earned the respect and trust of every researcher who had worked with him, and his dry sense of humor helped maintain morale during the long months of Arctic darkness. Lisa Wang, 26 years old, functioned as the station's communications specialist and data analyst, maintaining the critical satellite uplinks that connected Bars 7 to the outside world, and managing the vast streams of environmental data collected by dozens of automated sensors scattered across the surrounding ice. Her background in electrical engineering and computer science made her indispensable to the operation, and her ability to troubleshoot complex technical problems in sub-zero conditions had prevented several potential disasters when equipment failures threatened to leave the team stranded without communication or navigation capabilities. Robert Bob Thompson, 51 years old and a veteran of 23 years working for the National Weather Service in Alaska, served as the station's meteorologist and logistics coordinator. His role involved not only forecasting the severe weather systems that could trap the team for days at a time, but also managing the complex schedule of supply flights and personnel rotations that kept the station operational throughout the winter months. Bob's grey beard and weathered face told the story of decades spent in the Arctic, and his encyclopedic knowledge of local weather patterns had earned him legendary status among the research community. Dr. Elena Kowalski, 33 years old, had joined the team as a wildlife veterinarian and animal behavior specialist, bringing with her 15 years of experience working with large predators in both captive and wild settings. Her presence on the team was considered essential given the dangerous nature of their work in prime polar bear habitat, and her expertise in tranquilizing and handling aggressive wildlife had already proven valuable during several close encounters with curious bears in the first week of their deployment. Elena's Polish heritage showed in her high cheekbones and piercing blue eyes, and her calm demeanor under pressure had earned her the nickname Ice Queen among her colleagues, a title she wore with pride. The research team also included Dr. Ahmed Hassan, a 37-year-old geologist from Cairo who had specialized in permafrost studies and whose work on the effects of climate change on Arctic soil stability had brought him international recognition. Despite his origins in the desert climate of Egypt, Ahmed had adapted remarkably well to Arctic conditions and had become one of the most sought-after experts on the geological changes occurring across the polar regions. His methodical approach to data collection and his ability to identify subtle changes in permafrost conditions made him an invaluable member of the team. Jennifer Jen Campbell, 28 years old, worked as the station's cook and general support staff, a role that proved far more critical to morale and survival than most people realized. Her background in nutrition science and her experience preparing meals for remote research expeditions meant that the team enjoyed surprisingly good food despite the logistical challenges of maintaining fresh supplies in the Arctic. Jen's cheerful personality and seemingly endless supply of stories from previous expeditions helped maintain team cohesion during the long periods of confinement that characterized Arctic research. Dr. William Bill Anderson, 45 years old, served as the team's backup pilot and mechanical engineer, responsible for maintaining the station's 2 Polaris snowmobiles and the emergency shelter equipment that could mean the difference between life and death if the main facility suffered a catastrophic failure. His 20 years of experience as a bush pilot in Alaska had given him an intimate knowledge of Arctic survival techniques, and his ability to repair complex machinery with limited tools and spare parts had saved numerous expeditions from disaster. The final member of their group was Thomas "Tom" Mitchell, Sarah's older brother, and a 31-year-old documentary filmmaker who had received special permission to accompany the expedition to create an educational film about Arctic research. Tom's presence had initially caused some tension among the team members who worried about having an outsider documenting their work, but his respectful approach and his willingness to contribute to the mundane tasks of daily life had gradually won over even the most skeptical researchers. His professional-grade camera equipment and drone technology had already captured stunning footage of the Arctic landscape and the team's research activities. The morning of December 22nd began like most others at Bars 7, with the entire team gathering in the central common area at 0700 hours for breakfast and the daily briefing. The common area served as the heart of the facility, featuring a large dining table surrounded by comfortable seating, a well-equipped kitchen area, and a massive wall-mounted display screen that showed real-time weather data, satellite imagery, and communications from the outside world. The space was kept at a comfortable 72 degrees Fahrenheit through a sophisticated heating system that drew power from both solar panels and a diesel generator, creating a warm oasis of civilization in the midst of one of the most hostile environments on the planet. Karen stood before the assembled team, wearing her standard uniform of insulated pants, a merino wool base layer, and a fleece vest emblazoned with the NOAA logo. Her shoulder-length blonde hair tied back in a practical bun that kept it clear of her safety glasses. The morning light streaming through the reinforced windows cast long shadows across her face as she outlined the day's research activities, unaware that she was speaking to some of these people for the last time. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to leading expeditions in dangerous environments, but those who knew her well could detect the underlying excitement that always crept into her tone when discussing her work with polar bears. Current weather conditions show winds from the northwest at 18 miles per hour, with gusts up to 28, temperature holding steady at -37 degrees Fahrenheit, with a wind chill factor of -62, Bob announced from his position at the communications console, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he pulled up the latest satellite imagery. The good news is that we have clear skies for the next 6 hours, which gives us an excellent window for the planned observation mission to the Seal breathing holes, approximately 4 miles northeast of our position. The Seal breathing holes that Bob referenced had been discovered 3 days earlier by Elena during a routine survey flight in the station's Bell 206 helicopter, which was currently grounded for scheduled maintenance and would not be operational again until December 27th. The holes represented a critical feeding area for the local polar bear population, and Karen's research protocol called for detailed observation and documentation of bear hunting behaviors at these sites. The team had been planning this particular observation mission for over a week, waiting for the right combination of weather conditions and daylight hours that would allow them to safely travel to the location and set up their monitoring equipment. Sarah, Elena, and I will take Snowmobile 1 to establish the primary observation post approximately 200 meters downwind from the main cluster of breathing holes, Karen continued, gesturing toward a detailed topographical map spread across the dining table. Marcus and Ahmed will follow 30 minutes later on Snowmobile 2 with the secondary monitoring equipment and will establish a backup position here. She pointed to a location on the map marked with red ink. James will remain here as medical standby, and Tom has permission to accompany the second team to document the research process, provided he maintains complete silence once we reach the observation area. The planned observation mission represented the culmination of weeks of preparation and represented their best opportunity to gather crucial data about polar bear feeding behaviors during the critical winter hunting season. The team had invested considerable time and resources into developing a comprehensive monitoring protocol that would allow them to observe and document bear activities without disturbing the animals or putting the researchers at unnecessary risk. Their equipment included military-grade night vision cameras, motion-activated trail cameras, acoustic monitoring devices capable of detecting bear vocalizations from over a mile away, and sophisticated GPS tracking equipment that could monitor bear movements in real time. Dr. Elena Kowalski had spent the previous evening reviewing the latest intelligence reports on polar bear activity in the region, data that came from a network of automated monitoring stations scattered across a 50-square-mile area around Bars 7. The reports indicated that at least 6 adult bears were currently active within a 10-mile radius of the research station, including one massive male that the team had designated as Bear Alpha 7, an animal estimated to weigh over 800 pounds and measuring nearly 10 feet in length from nose to tail. Bear Alpha 7 had been tracked intermittently by satellite collar for the past 2 months and had demonstrated unusual persistence in returning to the same feeding areas, despite repeated disturbances from human activity. The bear activity reports show increased movement patterns over the last 48 hours, Elena announced, as she pulled up a digital display showing the GPS tracking data from the collared bears. Bear Alpha 7 was detected at a location approximately 6 miles southeast of here at 0230 this morning, moving in a generally northwestern direction at a steady pace. Based on his previous movement patterns, I estimate a 15% probability that he could arrive in our operational area sometime between 1400 and 1600 hours today. The mention of Bear Alpha 7 sent a barely perceptible ripple of tension through the assembled team members. This particular animal had already been involved in 3 separate encounters with research teams over the past month. Incidents that, while not directly threatening, had demonstrated the bear's lack of fear around humans and his tendency to investigate human activities with potentially dangerous curiosity. Elena's encounter with Alpha 7 during a supply run 5 days earlier had resulted in a tense standoff that lasted nearly 20 minutes before the bear finally lost interest and wandered away, but not before leaving massive paw prints in the snow less than 50 yards from where Elena had been forced to take shelter behind her snowmobile. "Standard protocol remains in effect," Karen reminded the team, her voice taking on the serious tone that indicated she was transitioning from briefing mode to safety lecture mode. "Nobody approaches within 300 meters of any bear without explicit authorization from Elena or myself. All team members carry emergency flares and marine air horns at all times while in the field. Communication checks every 15 minutes on Channel 7, with immediate abort procedures if anyone spots bear activity closer than 200 meters to our positions." The emergency procedures that Karen outlined had been developed over years of experience working in polar bear habitat and had been refined based on input from Inuit hunters, wildlife biologists, and survival experts who understood the deadly serious nature of close encounters with the Arctic's apex predator. A mature male polar bear could outrun a human across ice or snow, could swim faster than most people could run, possessed claws capable of slicing through inch-thick seal hide, and had jaw muscles powerful enough to crush a bowling ball. More importantly, polar bears were one of the few large predators on Earth that actively hunted humans as prey rather than simply defending territory or cubs. The morning preparation rituals that followed the briefing had been refined over weeks of daily repetition until they resembled a carefully choreographed dance. Each team member had specific responsibilities and equipment checks that had to be completed before anyone could leave the safety of the station. Sarah methodically packed her genetic sampling kit, including sterile collection containers, GPS units for marking sample locations, and the specialized tools needed to safely analyze bear scat and prey remains. Elena loaded her veterinary kit with tranquilizer darts, medical supplies, and the compact dart rifle that she had used successfully in previous encounters with aggressive wildlife. Marcus spent 20 minutes calibrating the portable weather monitoring station that would provide real-time atmospheric data during their observation mission, equipment that could detect wind speed and direction changes that might affect bear behavior or compromise their safety. Ahmed packed his geological sampling tools and the ground-penetrating radar unit that would allow him to map the ice thickness around the breathing holes, critical information for ensuring that their observation positions were located on stable ice that could support the weight of their equipment and provide secure escape routes if needed. Karen herself carried the most comprehensive equipment load, including the master GPS unit that would coordinate all team positions, emergency communication devices capable of reaching rescue services from anywhere within a 100-mile radius, and the specialized polar bear deterrent weapons that represented their last line of defense in case of an aggressive encounter. Her primary weapon was a 12-gauge shotgun loaded with rubber slugs designed to discourage rather than kill attacking bears, while her backup consisted of a .44 Magnum revolver loaded with hard-cast lead bullets, capable of penetrating a bear's skull if lethal force became necessary to save human lives. Tom Mitchell's documentary equipment had been carefully selected to operate in extreme cold conditions and included cameras capable of recording high-definition footage even in the low-light conditions that characterized Arctic winter days. His drone equipment had been modified with additional battery packs and cold-weather propellers that would allow him to capture aerial footage of bear behaviors from a safe distance, provided that weather conditions remained favorable throughout the mission. By 0830 hours, both snowmobile teams had completed their equipment checks and were ready to depart for the observation site. The Polaris snowmobiles used by the research team had been specially modified for Arctic operations with enlarged fuel tanks, heated hand grips, windshields designed to deflect wind-driven ice particles, and GPS navigation systems hardened against the extreme electromagnetic interference that characterized the polar regions. Each machine could carry 2 passengers plus equipment and could maintain speeds of up to 40 miles per hour across smooth ice or packed snow, though the rough terrain around the breathing holes would limit them to much slower speeds for safety reasons. The journey to the observation site took 43 minutes and covered a route that led northeast from Bars 7 across a landscape that appeared deceptively uniform to inexperienced eyes, but actually contained numerous hazards that could prove fatal to unwary travelers. The ice beneath them varied in thickness from less than 6 inches in some areas to over 3 feet in others, differences that could only be detected by experienced guides who understood how to read the subtle color variations and surface textures that indicated safe passage routes. The route took them across several areas of rough ice, where pressure ridges had been pushed up by wind and current action, creating maze-like passages between blocks of ice, some of which stood over 10 feet high. Karen led the first team, with Sarah riding behind her and Elena following on a separate machine, to ensure that they maintained proper spacing in case of mechanical problems or ice breakthrough. Their progress was steady but cautious, with frequent stops to check GPS coordinates and assess ice conditions ahead of their route. The landscape around them was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, an endless expanse of white, broken only by the occasional dark patch of open water where the ice had been too thin to support its own weight or where underwater currents had prevented complete freezing. The breathing holes they sought were located in an area where relatively warm water welling up from the depths of the Chukchi Sea maintained small openings in the ice that seals used to surface for air during their extended underwater hunting expeditions. These holes were crucial to seal survival during the winter months when the ocean surface was otherwise completely frozen, and their presence attracted polar bears who had learned to wait patiently beside the holes for seals to surface within striking range. The hunting behavior associated with these breathing holes represented one of the most dramatic examples of predator-prey relationships in the Arctic, and documenting these interactions was one of the primary objectives of Karen's research project. Marcus and Ahmed departed from Bars 7:30 minutes after the first team, as planned, giving Karen's group time to establish their primary observation position and begin preliminary surveillance of the breathing hole area. Tom rode behind Marcus, his camera equipment securely fastened in waterproof cases designed to protect the sensitive electronics from moisture, vibration, and extreme temperature fluctuations. The second team's route followed the same path blazed by the first group, marked by GPS waypoints and the tracks left by the lead snowmobiles in the snow. James Rodriguez remained at the research station as planned, monitoring communications and maintaining readiness to launch an immediate rescue operation if any of the field teams encountered problems. His responsibilities included monitoring weather conditions for any changes that might threaten the safety of the teams in the field, maintaining communication schedules with each group, and preparing emergency medical supplies in case of injuries or accidents. James had participated in 7 previous Arctic rescue operations during his time working in Alaska, and he understood better than most how quickly routine fieldwork could transform into life-threatening emergencies in the polar environment. Lisa Wang remained at her communications post, monitoring the multiple data streams from automated sensors scattered across the research area while maintaining contact with the teams in the field. Her equipment included emergency locator beacons that could track the exact positions of all team members in real time, satellite communication links that could reach rescue services anywhere in Alaska within minutes, and weather monitoring systems that provided early warning of approaching storms or dangerous wind conditions. The first signs of Bear Alpha 7's presence became apparent at approximately 11:47 hours when Eleanor detected fresh paw prints approximately 800 meters south of their planned observation position. The prints were unmistakably those of a large adult male, measuring nearly 12 inches in length and showing the characteristic 5-claw pattern that distinguished polar bear tracks from those of other Arctic wildlife. The depth of the impressions in the snow indicated an animal of substantial weight, and the spacing between individual tracks suggested the measured, purposeful gait of a bear following a scent trail rather than simply traveling between feeding areas. "This is Elena on Channel 7, she announced into her radio headset, her voice carefully controlled to avoid alarming her teammates while still conveying the seriousness of the situation. "I have fresh bear sign approximately 400 meters bearing south-southwest of primary observation point Alpha. Tracks appear to be from a large adult male, estimated age less than 6 hours based on snowdrift patterns and edge definition. Recommend increased vigilance and preparation for possible bear encounter within the next 2 hours. Karen's response came immediately through the encrypted communication system that linked all field team members. "Copy that, Elena. Continue with planned observation protocol, but maintain constant visual sweep of approach routes from the south and southwest. Marcus, what's your ETA to secondary position Beta?" The calm professionalism in Karen's voice reflected years of experience dealing with potentially dangerous wildlife encounters, but those who knew her well could detect the slight increase in speaking pace that indicated heightened alertness and concern. "Marcus here, ETA to secondary position Beta approximately 12 minutes, came the reply from the second team. We have clear sight lines for the next kilometer and no additional bear sign visible from our current position. Tom is getting excellent footage of the breathing hole area, and Ahmed reports ice thickness readings within acceptable parameters for our planned observation duration. The breathing holes themselves proved to be even more impressive than the aerial reconnaissance had suggested, with the largest opening measuring nearly 8 feet across and showing clear evidence of recent seal activity. Dark stains on the surrounding ice indicated multiple successful kills by polar bears over the past few weeks, and the abundance of scattered fish bones and seal remains suggested that this location represented a major feeding area for the local bear population. Karen's team established their primary observation post approximately 250 meters downwind from the main cluster of holes, using a portable blind constructed from white canvas and supported by lightweight aluminum poles that could be assembled or dismantled within minutes if rapid evacuation became necessary. The scientific equipment deployed at the observation site represented the culmination of decades of technological development, specifically for Arctic wildlife research. Motion-activated cameras capable of detecting bear movements from over half a mile away were positioned at strategic locations around the breathing hole area, while acoustic monitoring equipment recorded the underwater sounds made by hunting seals and the surface vocalizations of any bears that might approach the area. Temperature sensors measured both air and water temperatures at 15-minute intervals, while wind speed and direction monitors provided data essential for understanding how environmental conditions might affect animal behavior. Sarah began her genetic sampling work immediately upon arrival, carefully collecting seal remains and bear scat from locations around the breathing holes while using GPS equipment to precisely map the location of each sample. Her work required extreme attention to detail to avoid contamination of samples and to ensure that the genetic analysis would provide accurate information about bear diet, health, and population genetics. Each sample was photographed, catalogued, and stored in specially designed containers that would preserve the genetic material even if exposed to extreme temperature fluctuations during transport back to BARS-7. Elena positioned herself at the observation post with the best sightlines to potential bear approach routes, her tranquilizer rifle loaded and ready while she scanned the surrounding ice through high-powered binoculars designed for Arctic conditions. Her role required not only watching for bears, but also interpreting their behavior patterns to predict whether approaching animals were likely to be curious, aggressive, or simply traveling through the area without interest in human activities. Her years of experience working with large predators had taught her to recognize the subtle differences in posture, gait, and facial expressions that could indicate a bear's mood and intentions. Marcus established the secondary weather monitoring station at a position that provided overlapping coverage with Karen's primary observation post, while also giving his team independent escape routes in case of emergency. His equipment provided real-time data on wind patterns, temperature fluctuations, and barometric pressure changes that could affect both animal behavior and human safety during extended periods of outdoor exposure. The weather data was automatically transmitted back to BARS-7 every 5 minutes, allowing James and Lisa to monitor conditions and provide early warning of any changes that might threaten the field teams. Tom Mitchell's documentary work proceeded smoothly during the first 2 hours of the observation mission, with his cameras capturing stunning footage of the breathing hole area and the surrounding Arctic landscape. His drone flights provided spectacular aerial views that revealed the complex patterns of ice formation around the seal breathing holes, while also serving as an additional surveillance tool for detecting approaching bears from directions that ground-based observers might not be watching. The drone's thermal imaging capabilities proved particularly valuable for identifying the heat signatures of seals swimming beneath the ice surface. At 13:23 hours, the first seal appeared at the largest breathing hole, its whiskered head barely visible above the water surface as it cautiously scanned the surrounding area for signs of danger before taking a quick breath and disappearing beneath the ice again. The seal's behavior was typical of animals that were aware of predator presence in the area, with extremely brief surface intervals and constant vigilance that suggested polar bears had been hunting at this location recently. Karen documented the seal's behavior patterns through detailed notes and photography, data that would later be analyzed to understand how predator pressure affected seal feeding and breathing behaviors. The appearance of the seal triggered immediate changes in the team's observation protocols, with all cameras and recording equipment activated to capture any subsequent wildlife activity at the breathing holes. Elena increased her vigilance, scanning for bear activity, knowing that the scent of the seal would likely attract any predators in the surrounding area within a relatively short time period. The team maintained strict silence and minimal movement to avoid alerting the seal to their presence, understanding that frightening away potential prey would likely reduce their chances of observing natural bear hunting behaviors. At 13:41 hours, Elena detected movement approximately 600 meters to the southwest of their position, a large white shape moving slowly but purposefully across the ice in the direction of the breathing holes. Initial observation through binoculars confirmed the presence of a large adult male polar bear that matched the estimated size and characteristics of bear Alpha 7 based on previous tracking data and photographic evidence. The bear appeared to be following a scent trail, moving with the characteristic hunting gait that indicated focused attention on potential prey rather than casual travel between feeding areas. "All stations, this is Elena with priority alert," she announced in a calm but urgent whisper into her radio headset. "Large adult male polar bear confirmed, range approximately 600 meters and closing on the breathing hole area from bearing 210 degrees. Bear appears to be actively hunting and shows no awareness of human presence at this time. Recommend all personnel maintain current positions and avoid any movement or noise that might alert the animal to our presence." The next 17 minutes would later be described by survivors as simultaneously the most exciting and terrifying period of their professional careers, as they watched Bear Alpha 7 demonstrate the hunting skills that had made polar bears one of the most successful predators in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The bear's approach to the breathing holes was a masterpiece of patience and stealth, with the massive animal moving silently across the ice, despite weighing over 800 pounds and standing nearly 5 feet at the shoulder. His white fur provided perfect camouflage against the snow and ice, making him virtually invisible unless observers knew exactly where to look. The bear's hunting strategy involved approaching the breathing hole from downwind to avoid being detected by the seal's keen sense of smell, then positioning himself beside the hole and remaining perfectly motionless for extended periods while waiting for prey to surface. Karen's team watched in fascination as the bear demonstrated the legendary patience that allowed polar bears to wait beside breathing holes for hours or even days until a seal finally surfaced within striking range. The bear's black nose remained constantly in motion, sampling air currents for scent information about seal activity below the ice surface. Tom Mitchell's cameras captured unprecedented footage of polar bear hunting behavior, documenting the subtle body language and positioning strategies that few researchers had ever been able to observe at such close range. The bear's massive paws, each nearly the size of a dinner plate, were positioned to provide maximum stability on the slippery ice surface, while allowing for explosive movement when a strike opportunity presented itself. His small, dark eyes remained fixed on the breathing hole with an intensity that demonstrated complete focus on the hunting task at hand. At 13:58 hours, the seal that had been observed earlier surfaced again at the breathing hole, its head emerging from the dark water for what would prove to be its final breath. The bear's reaction was instantaneous and devastating, his massive right paw striking downward with blinding speed and incredible precision to hook the seal's head and shoulders with claws that penetrated completely through the animal's skull. The entire attack lasted less than 2 seconds, but the power and efficiency of the strike demonstrated why polar bears were considered one of the most formidable predators on the planet. The bear's extraction of his prey from the breathing hole showcased the incredible strength that allowed these animals to haul seals weighing over 200 pounds from the water onto the ice surface using only their front paws and jaw muscles. Bear Alpha 7 consumed his kill with methodical efficiency, beginning with the seal's fat-rich blubber layer before proceeding to the internal organs and muscle tissue. The feeding process took approximately 23 minutes, during which the research team maintained complete silence and minimal movement to avoid disturbing the bear's natural behaviors. The successful documentation of this hunting sequence represented a major breakthrough for Karen's research project, providing detailed behavioral data that would significantly advance scientific understanding of polar bear feeding strategies and hunting success rates. However, the team's elation over their scientific success was tempered by their awareness that they were now sharing a relatively small area of ice with a large, recently fed and potentially unpredictable predator that had demonstrated no fear of human presence during previous encounters. Elena maintained constant visual surveillance of Bear Alpha 7 throughout his feeding process, noting subtle changes in his posture and behavior that might indicate his future intentions. A recently fed bear was generally less likely to be aggressive toward humans, but could also be more likely to investigate novel objects or scents out of curiosity rather than hunger-driven caution. The bear's body language suggested satisfaction and relaxation rather than agitation or territorial aggression, but Elena knew that polar bear behavior could change rapidly and without warning in response to perceived threats or unexpected stimuli. At 14:21 hours, Bear Alpha 7 completed his consumption of the seal and began what appeared to be a grooming session, using his massive tongue to clean blood and seal fat from his paws and muzzle. This behavior was typical of polar bears after successful hunts and usually indicated that the animal would soon move away from the kill site to seek shelter for digestion and rest. However, instead of departing from the breathing hole area as expected, the bear began displaying what Elena recognized as investigative behavior, raising his head to sample air currents and showing increased alertness to his surroundings. "All stations, this is Elena with status update," she whispered into her radio system. "Bear Alpha 7 has completed feeding, but is showing investigative behavior rather than departure patterns. I assess 15 to 20% probability that he has detected human scent or presence in the area. Recommend all teams begin preparation for possible emergency evacuation while maintaining current concealment positions." Karen acknowledged Elena's assessment while simultaneously beginning mental calculations about evacuation routes and timing. The team's snowmobiles were positioned approximately 400 meters from their current observation posts, far enough away to avoid disturbing wildlife, but also far enough to represent a significant exposure risk if Bear Alpha 7 decided to investigate human activity in the area. The established evacuation protocol called for team members to move individually at 30-second intervals to minimize the chance of attracting bear attention through group movement. But the success of this strategy depended entirely on the bear maintaining his current position near the breathing holes. Marcus and Tom's secondary observation position was located approximately 300 meters from Bear Alpha 7's current location, placing them in a potentially vulnerable situation if the bear decided to investigate human activities. Their evacuation route to their snowmobile required crossing an area of relatively open ice that would provide little concealment if the bear was actively watching for movement. Marcus had already begun making hand signals to Tom, indicating that they should prepare for rapid evacuation, while Tom was securing his camera equipment in preparation for potentially hasty departure. At 14:27 hours, Bear Alpha 7's behavior shifted dramatically from passive investigation to active hunting mode as he suddenly oriented toward Marcus and Tom's position and began moving in their direction with the purposeful gait that indicated he had definitely detected human presence. The bear's change in behavior was so sudden and complete that it caught even Elena off guard, despite her years of experience reading polar bear body language and behavioral cues. Within seconds, the bear had transformed from a satiated predator engaged in routine post-feeding activities to an alert and potentially dangerous animal, actively investigating what he clearly recognized as an unusual presence in his territory. Emergency evacuation. All stations, emergency evacuation now. Elena's voice cut through the radio channels with an urgency that immediately communicated the seriousness of the situation to all team members. Bear Alpha 7 is actively approaching secondary position Beta and appears to have identified human presence. All personnel initiate immediate evacuation to vehicles using Protocol 7 dispersal patterns. Protocol 7 represented the most serious of the team's emergency evacuation procedures, designed for situations where polar bear aggression or pursuit was considered imminent and where the safety of human team members took absolute priority over equipment recovery or scientific objectives. The protocol called for immediate abandonment of all non-essential equipment, rapid movement to vehicles using predetermined routes designed to minimize exposure time, and emergency communication to Bars 7 requesting immediate standby for potential rescue operations. Karen's evacuation from primary position Alpha proceeded according to protocol, with her abandoning the observation blind and most of the scientific equipment while retaining only essential survival gear and emergency communication devices. Her route to Snowmobile 1 took her across approximately 370 meters of relatively open ice, during which she would be completely exposed to observation by Bear Alpha 7 if the animal chose to scan in her direction. Her movement was as rapid as possible while still maintaining the stealth necessary to avoid attracting the bear's attention through sudden noise or motion. Sarah followed Karen's evacuation route 30 seconds later, carrying only her personal survival equipment and emergency communication devices, while abandoning her entire genetic sampling kit and most of her scientific instruments. The loss of several weeks' worth of carefully collected samples represented a significant setback for the research project, but the team's safety protocols were absolute in their prioritization of human life over scientific objectives. Sarah's background in Arctic survival training served her well during the evacuation, allowing her to move quickly across the treacherous ice surface without falling or creating noise that might alert the bear to her movement. Elena's position as the team's wildlife expert and designated safety officer required her to maintain visual contact with Bear Alpha 7 for as long as possible, while still allowing sufficient time for her own evacuation to safety. Her route to the snowmobiles was the longest and most exposed of any team member, requiring her to cross nearly 400 meters of open ice while carrying her tranquilizer rifle and emergency medical kit. Elena's evacuation represented the most dangerous phase of the entire operation, as she would be completely exposed and vulnerable during the time required to reach the vehicles. Marcus and Tom faced the most immediate danger as Bear Alpha 7 was moving directly toward their position and would likely reach their observation post within 2 to 3 minutes if he maintained his current pace and direction. Their evacuation required them to move away from the approaching bear while still making progress toward their snowmobile, a challenging navigation problem that required them to balance speed with the need to avoid attracting additional attention through rapid movement. Marcus took the lead with Tom, following closely behind, both men moving as quickly as possible while trying to maintain noise discipline. The bear's approach to Marcus and Tom's position demonstrated the intelligence and adaptability that made polar bears such formidable predators in Arctic environments. Rather than charging directly toward the obvious location where human scent was strongest, Bear Alpha 7 moved in a wide arc that would allow him to approach from downwind, while also cutting off the most direct escape route to the snowmobiles. This tactical sophistication suggested that the bear had previous experience with human encounters and had learned to anticipate human behavioral patterns during confrontations. At 14:31 hours, Bear Alpha 7 reached the abandoned secondary position Beta observation post and began a thorough investigation of the equipment and supplies that Marcus and Tom had been forced to leave behind during their rapid evacuation. The bear's examination of the foreign objects was methodical and careful, using his sensitive nose to gather scent information about the humans who had recently occupied the area, while also testing various pieces of equipment with his massive paws. Several expensive pieces of scientific equipment were destroyed during this investigation, but the bear's focus on the abandoned materials provided crucial additional time for the human team members to increase their distance from the potential threat. Karen reached Snowmobile 1 at 14:33 hours and immediately began the starting sequence while scanning the surrounding area for signs of other team members and maintaining radio communication with the evacuation in progress. The Polaris machine started immediately, despite the extreme cold, its specially modified engine and cold-weather starting system performing exactly as designed. Karen positioned the snowmobile for rapid departure while also ensuring that she could provide emergency pickup for Sarah and Elena if their evacuation routes were compromised by bear activity. Sarah reached Karen's position 90 seconds later, having successfully completed her evacuation route without attracting bear attention or encountering significant obstacles. The two women quickly established communication with the rest of the team while preparing to depart for Bar 7 as soon as Elena completed her evacuation and Marcus and Tom reached their snowmobile safely. Sarah's scientific training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but the adrenaline rush of evacuating from an active polar bear threat left her hands shaking as she secured her safety equipment and prepared for the high-speed return journey to the research station. Marcus and Tom's situation became increasingly precarious as Bear Alpha 7 completed his investigation of the abandoned observation post and began following their scent trail toward the location where Snowmobile 2 was parked. The bear's tracking behavior demonstrated the remarkable scent-following abilities that allowed polar bears to locate seal-breathing holes from distances of over a mile and to track prey animals across vast expanses of seemingly featureless ice. The two men could see their snowmobile approximately 150 meters ahead, but they were also aware that Bear Alpha 7 was probably less than 200 meters behind them and closing the distance steadily. Elena's evacuation proceeded according to plan until she reached a point approximately 100 meters from the snowmobiles, where a pressure ridge in the ice forced her to choose between a longer route around the obstacle or a more direct but technically challenging path over the broken ice. Her decision to take the direct route proved nearly fatal when her foot broke through a thin section of ice, plunging her leg into water cold enough to cause frostbite within minutes of exposure. Elena managed to extract herself from the ice hole, but the incident left her boot and lower legs soaked with frigid water and significantly reduced her mobility for the remainder of the evacuation. Tom Mitchell's documentary instincts proved both blessing and curse during the evacuation, as he continued filming the bear's behavior even while fleeing for his life. His footage would later provide crucial evidence for wildlife authorities investigating the incident, but his attention to his camera equipment also slowed his evacuation and increased the risk to both himself and Marcus. The dramatic irony of documenting his own potential death was not lost on Tom, whose professional dedication to his craft compelled him to continue recording, even as survival instincts demanded his complete attention to escape and evasion. At 14:37 hours, Marcus and Tom reached Snowmobile 2 and began the starting sequence, but the machine's engine failed to turn over on the first attempt due to the extreme cold and the fact that it had been sitting idle for over 3 hours. Marcus's experience with cold weather equipment operation served him well as he methodically worked through the starting procedure, while Tom maintained visual surveillance of Bear Alpha 7's approach. The bear was now clearly visible approximately 120 meters away and moving steadily in their direction with the determined pace that indicated he was actively pursuing the human scent trail. The second attempt to start Snowmobile 2 was successful, and Marcus immediately began maneuvering the machine for rapid departure while Tom climbed onto the passenger position behind him. However, their escape was complicated by the fact that their most direct route back to Bars 7 would take them across an area of rough ice that Bear Alpha 7 could potentially traverse more quickly than their heavily loaded snowmobile. Marcus made the tactical decision to take a longer but safer route that would keep them on smooth ice suitable for high-speed travel, even though this route would add nearly 15 minutes to their journey time and would consume additional fuel that might be needed for other emergencies. Elena's water-soaked boot had begun freezing within minutes of her extraction from the ice hole, creating a potentially serious frostbite situation that threatened to incapacitate her before she could reach safety. Her years of Arctic experience had taught her the critical importance of maintaining circulation in extremities exposed to extreme cold, and she began the painful process of forcing continued movement despite the increasing numbness in her foot and lower leg. Elena's evacuation time was significantly compromised by her injury, but she maintained communication with Karen's team while continuing to move toward the snowmobiles as rapidly as her condition would allow. Karen made the command decision to retrieve Elena rather than waiting for her to complete her evacuation independently, recognizing that Elena's injury and the approaching bear created a situation where time was more critical than maintaining optimal evacuation protocol. Sarah took over operation of Snowmobile 1 while Karen moved on foot to intercept Elena and provide assistance with the final phase of her evacuation. This decision violated established safety protocols that called for team members to avoid exposure to additional risk during emergency situations, but Karen's assessment of the tactical situation convinced her that Elena could not reach safety without assistance. The rescue of Elena required Karen to traverse approximately 80 meters of open ice, while Bear Alpha 7 was actively investigating the area and potentially aware of ongoing human activity. Karen's approach to Elena's position required her to move quickly enough to minimize exposure time, while also maintaining sufficient stealth to avoid attracting bear attention during the most dangerous phase of the entire evacuation. Her success in reaching Elena without being detected by the bear was later attributed to her extensive experience in Arctic environments and her thorough understanding of polar bear sensory capabilities and behavioral patterns. Elena's extraction to Snowmobile 1 was complicated by her frozen boot and reduced mobility, requiring Karen to provide physical support, while both women remained as quiet as possible to avoid alerting Bear Alpha 7 to their location. The process took nearly 3 minutes longer than optimal evacuation timing, during which both women were completely vulnerable to bear attack if their presence was detected. Elena's professional assessment was that Bear Alpha 7 remained focused on investigating the abandoned equipment and had not yet detected their evacuation activities. But she also acknowledged that polar bear behavior could change rapidly and without warning. At 14:42 hours, both snowmobile teams had successfully evacuated from the observation area and were en route to Bars 7, with Karen's team leading and Marcus following approximately 200 meters behind. The return journey required constant vigilance for additional bear activity, ice conditions that might compromise vehicle mobility, and weather changes that could reduce visibility or create navigation challenges. Karen maintained radio communication with BARS-7 throughout the return journey, providing regular updates on team status and requesting medical standby for Elena's cold injury and the general stress effects of the emergency evacuation. James Rodriguez received the emergency communication at BARS-7 and immediately began preparations for medical treatment of cold exposure injuries, while also initiating contact with emergency services in Utqiagvik to request standby for potential medical evacuation if Elena's condition proved more serious than initial assessments indicated. His experience as a combat medic had taught him the importance of preparing for worst-case scenarios while hoping for the best possible outcomes, and he began assembling medical supplies for treating everything from minor frostbite to hypothermia and trauma injuries that might have occurred during the evacuation. Lisa Wang's communication with outside emergency services provided the first official notification that Bear Alpha 7 had demonstrated aggressive behavior toward human researchers and would need to be monitored more closely by wildlife authorities. Her detailed incident report included GPS coordinates of the encounter, descriptions of bear behavior patterns, and recommendations for increased monitoring of bear activity in the BARS-7 operational area. This information would prove crucial for wildlife managers attempting to assess the long-term threat that Alpha 7 might pose to future research operations and personnel safety. The successful evacuation of all team members without serious injury was later credited to the comprehensive safety training and emergency procedures that Karen had insisted upon during the pre-deployment preparation phase. However, the incident also highlighted several areas where existing protocols could be improved, particularly regarding equipment placement strategies that would allow for more rapid evacuation without abandoning expensive scientific instruments. The loss of over $40,000 worth of research equipment during the evacuation represented a significant financial impact on the project, but was considered completely acceptable given the alternative of risking human lives. Bear Alpha 7's behavior following the human evacuation suggested that his investigation of the observation area was motivated primarily by curiosity rather than predatory aggression, as he spent nearly 2 additional hours examining the abandoned equipment before eventually losing interest and moving away from the area. Wildlife experts who later reviewed Tom Mitchell's footage of the incident concluded that the bear's approach to the human position was consistent with investigative behavior rather than hunting behavior, but also noted that the distinction between these behavioral patterns could change rapidly and without warning in response to perceived threats or unexpected stimuli. The team's return to Bars 7 was completed without further incident, with both snowmobile teams arriving at the research station by 15:18 hours on December 22nd. Elena's cold injury was treated immediately by James Rodriguez and proved to be minor frostbite that would heal completely within 2 weeks with proper care and protection from further cold exposure. The psychological impact of the evacuation was more difficult to assess immediately, but all team members reported elevated stress levels and hypervigilance that was consistent with normal responses to dangerous wildlife encounters. Karen's post-incident debriefing with the entire team identified several lessons learned that would be incorporated into future operations, including improved communication procedures for emergency evacuations, better positioning strategies for observation equipment, and enhanced coordination between multiple teams operating in potentially dangerous areas. The debriefing also highlighted the exceptional performance of all team members during the emergency situation, with particular recognition for Elena's professionalism in maintaining bear surveillance during her own evacuation and Marcus's skill in successfully starting and operating the snowmobile under extreme pressure. The incident report filed with the National Science Foundation and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service provided detailed documentation of bear Alpha 7's behavior and included recommendations for enhanced monitoring of the animal's future activities. The report noted that the bear had demonstrated no actual aggressive behavior toward humans, but had shown persistent curiosity about human activities that could potentially lead to dangerous encounters in the future. Wildlife authorities began immediate development of enhanced tracking protocols for Alpha 7, including consideration of relocation options if his behavior patterns continued to bring him into conflict with research operations. Tom Mitchell's documentary footage of the incident provided unprecedented documentation of polar bear behavior during encounters with human researchers and would later be used for educational purposes and wildlife management training programs. The footage also served as crucial evidence for insurance claims related to the lost research equipment and supported the team's professional assessments of bear behavior during the encounter. Tom's dedication to continuing his documentation work, even during the emergency evacuation, was noted in official reports as both admirable and concerning, highlighting the need for clear protocols governing documentary activities during emergency situations. The December 22nd encounter with bear Alpha 7 marked a significant escalation in polar bear activity around Bars 7, but it was not the final chapter in the research station's encounters with dangerous wildlife. The events that followed would prove that the morning's evacuation was merely a preview of the catastrophic incident that would occur later that same day, when the research station itself would become the target of an unprecedented polar bear attack that would leave one researcher fighting for her life and change the nature of Arctic research operations permanently. The afternoon hours following the team's return from the breathing hole observation mission were characterized by a deceptive sense of normalcy as team members worked to process the morning's events and prepare for continuation of their research activities. Karen spent considerable time updating her research notes and analyzing the successful documentation of polar bear hunting behavior, work that represented a significant breakthrough in understanding predator-prey relationships in Arctic marine ecosystems. Despite the morning's emergency evacuation, the scientific value of their observations was undeniable, and Karen began planning modified observation protocols that would allow the team to continue their research while incorporating the lessons learned from their encounter with bear Alpha 7. Elena received medical treatment for her frostbite injury and spent time reviewing the morning's events from a wildlife behavior perspective, analyzing bear Alpha 7's actions and developing updated threat assessment protocols for future encounters with the same animal. Her professional conclusion was that the bear had demonstrated curiosity rather than aggression, but she also emphasized the need for increased vigilance and modified safety procedures, given the animal's apparent lack of fear around human activities. Elena's injury would require her to avoid extended field exposure for several days, potentially compromising the team's wildlife safety coverage during future operations. Marcus and Ahmed used the afternoon hours to analyze the weather data collected during the morning mission, identifying atmospheric conditions that might have contributed to Bear Alpha 7's behavior patterns, and developing predictive models for future bear activity based on environmental factors. Their work suggested that the current weather pattern, characterized by unusually warm temperatures and shifting wind patterns, might be contributing to increased bear mobility and changes in traditional feeding behavior patterns that brought the animals into closer contact with human activities. Sarah began the process of cataloging and analyzing the genetic samples she had collected before the emergency evacuation, work that was complicated by the loss of field equipment, but still valuable for understanding polar bear population genetics and dietary patterns. Her preliminary analysis of seal remains found at the breathing hole suggested that the local bear population was successfully adapting to changing ice conditions by modifying their hunting strategies, information that would prove crucial for long-term conservation planning and habitat management decisions. James Rodriguez conducted a comprehensive medical evaluation of all team members to assess the physical and psychological effects of the morning's emergency evacuation, identifying elevated stress levels and minor injuries that required attention, but finding no serious medical concerns that would compromise the team's ability to continue their research mission. His medical assessment included recommendations for stress management activities and increased monitoring of team member psychological well-being during the remainder of their Arctic deployment. Lisa Wang worked to restore communication links with outside agencies and to provide detailed incident reports to the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and emergency services in Utqiagvik. Her communications included requests for enhanced weather monitoring support, updated bear tracking information, and standby emergency response capabilities that could be activated quickly if future incidents required external assistance. Lisa's work was complicated by intermittent communication disruptions caused by atmospheric conditions that were typical of Arctic winter operations. Tom Mitchell spent the afternoon reviewing and organizing the footage he had captured during the morning's bear encounter, work that would later prove invaluable for scientific analysis and public education about polar bear behavior and Arctic research challenges. His footage provided the most comprehensive documentation of polar bear hunting behavior ever recorded at such close range, and wildlife experts would later use the material for training programs and behavioral analysis studies. Tom's dedication to his documentary work had nearly compromised his own safety during the evacuation, but the resulting footage was of unprecedented scientific and educational value. By 16:30 hours, the research station had settled into what appeared to be a normal evening routine, with team members engaged in data analysis, equipment maintenance, and preparation for the next day's research activities. The heating system maintained a comfortable temperature throughout the facility, despite outside temperatures that had dropped to -41 degrees Fahrenheit, and the reinforced windows provided clear views of the surrounding Arctic landscape as the brief December daylight began fading into the prolonged darkness that characterized polar winter conditions. The first indication that December 22nd was far from over came at 16:47 hours, when Lisa Wang's automated perimeter monitoring system detected large animal movement approximately 400 meters south of Bars 7. The detection system consisted of motion-activated cameras and infrared sensors positioned around the research station to provide early warning of approaching wildlife, particularly polar bears that might be attracted to the facility by food odors, waste materials, or simple curiosity about the unusual structures in their territory. The system had functioned flawlessly since installation, providing advance warning of several bear encounters that had been resolved without incident through the use of noisemakers and other non-lethal deterrent methods. "We have large animal movement on the southern perimeter sensors," Lisa announced to the assembled team members, her voice carrying the professional calm that characterized all communications during potential wildlife encounters. Single contact, moving northwest at approximately 3 miles per hour, consistent with polar bear locomotion patterns. Current range 400 meters and slowly decreasing. All stations should prepare for possible bear encounter and implement Standard Protocol 4 monitoring procedures. Standard Protocol 4 represented the intermediate level of response to bear presence near the research station, involving increased vigilance, preparation of deterrent devices, and monitoring of bear behavior to assess threat levels and determine appropriate response measures. The protocol was designed to balance the need for personnel safety with the scientific objectives of the research mission, allowing continued operations within the station while maintaining readiness for emergency response if bear behavior escalated to threatening levels. Elena immediately moved to the station's primary observation window, her binoculars and tranquilizer rifle ready as she began systematic surveillance of the area where the motion sensors had detected animal movement. Despite her frostbite injury from the morning's evacuation, Elena insisted on taking her position as the team's wildlife safety expert, understanding that her experience and training made her the most qualified person to assess bear behavior and coordinate response measures. Her injured foot was carefully wrapped and elevated when possible, but she was determined to fulfill her responsibilities to the team, despite her reduced mobility. Karen joined Elena at the observation window, carrying the station's emergency communication devices and maintaining contact with outside agencies while preparing to coordinate evacuation procedures if the approaching bear demonstrated threatening behavior. Her morning encounter with Bear Alpha 7 had heightened her awareness of how quickly routine wildlife encounters could escalate into dangerous situations, and she was determined to ensure that her team was prepared for any contingency. Karen's leadership experience in Arctic environments made her the natural coordinator for emergency response activities. The bear that appeared in Eleanor's binoculars at 16:52 hours was immediately recognizable as Bear Alpha 7, the same massive male that had caused the morning's emergency evacuation from the breathing hole observation site. The animal's distinctive size, coloration, and gait pattern left no doubt about his identity, and his presence near bars 7 represented an escalation in his apparent interest in human activities that Elena found deeply concerning. Bears that lost their natural fear of humans often became increasingly bold in their investigations of human settlements and equipment, a behavioral pattern that could lead to dangerous confrontations. Confirmed identification of Bear Alpha 7 approaching from bearing 185 degrees, Elena reported through the station's communication system, range approximately 350 meters and continuing to approach at steady pace. Bear appears alert and purposeful rather than casual, suggesting possible attraction to station odors or activities. Recommend implementation of active deterrent measures while maintaining readiness for emergency evacuation if deterrents prove ineffective. The team's first deterrent attempt involved activating the station's external loudspeakers to broadcast recorded polar bear vocalizations designed to simulate territorial warnings from other bears in the area. This technique had proven successful in previous encounters with curious bears, convincing them that the area was already occupied by other polar bears and encouraging them to seek feeding opportunities elsewhere. The recorded vocalizations were based on scientific research into polar bear communication patterns and had been field tested at other Arctic research facilities with good results. Bear Alpha 7's reaction to the recorded vocalizations was immediate and unexpected, as the animal actually increased his pace toward the research station rather than showing the avoidance behavior that the deterrent was designed to produce. Elena recognized this response as highly unusual and potentially indicating that the bear had previous experience with human-generated sounds and had learned to associate them with food or other rewards rather than territorial threats. This behavioral adaptation suggested that Alpha 7 had encountered human activities frequently enough to overcome his natural wariness and develop conditioned responses that made traditional deterrent methods less effective. Deterrent effectiveness. Negative, repeat, negative response to acoustic deterrent measures, Elena announced with growing concern evident in her voice. Bear Alpha 7 is showing increased approach behavior and appears to be attracted rather than deterred by recorded vocalizations. Range now approximately 250 meters and decreasing. Recommend preparation for emergency evacuation and implementation of Protocol 6 enhanced deterrent measures. Protocol 6 represented the most aggressive non-lethal deterrent measures available to the research team, including high-intensity strobe lights, marine air horns, and rubber bullet projectiles designed to frighten bears without causing serious injury. These measures were reserved for situations where standard deterrents had failed and bear behavior suggested imminent threat to personnel safety. The use of Protocol 6 measures also required immediate notification of wildlife authorities and preparation for potential lethal force if non-lethal methods proved insufficient to protect human life. James Rodriguez began implementing Protocol 6 procedures by activating the station's emergency strobe light system, powerful LED arrays mounted on the exterior of the facility that could produce disorienting light patterns visible from several miles away. The strobe lights were designed to create visual confusion and discomfort for approaching bears, while also serving as emergency beacons that could guide rescue aircraft to the station's location. The activation of the strobe system automatically triggered emergency communication protocols that notified outside agencies of potential crisis situations requiring immediate response. Marcus and Ahmed secured all internal equipment and prepared the station's emergency power systems for potential evacuation scenarios, ensuring that critical communication and life support systems would continue functioning even if primary power was disrupted by bear damage or other emergency conditions. Their preparations included checking emergency fuel supplies, testing backup generators, and verifying the integrity of the station's structural systems that might be needed to withstand bear attacks on the facility itself. Sarah and Tom worked together to secure scientific equipment and personal belongings in preparation for potential emergency evacuation, prioritizing irreplaceable research data and essential survival equipment while preparing to abandon less critical materials if rapid departure became necessary. Their experience from the morning's evacuation had taught them the importance of preparing for rapid departure while maintaining focus on survival priorities rather than equipment protection. Bob Thompson monitored weather conditions and communication channels, providing regular updates on atmospheric conditions that might affect evacuation procedures while maintaining contact with emergency services in Utqiagvik. His weather monitoring indicated deteriorating conditions with increasing wind speeds and decreasing visibility that could complicate rescue operations if external assistance became necessary. Bob's experience with Arctic weather patterns allowed him to provide critical information about weather windows that might be available for emergency response activities. At 16:58 hours, Bear Alpha 7 reached a position approximately 100 meters from Bars 7 and began displaying behavior patterns that Elena recognized as systematic investigation of the facility's exterior perimeter. Rather than approaching directly toward the main entrance or showing random exploratory behavior, the bear began methodically examining different sections of the station's exterior, testing various surfaces and openings with his massive paws and sensitive nose. This systematic investigation suggested intelligence and purpose that went beyond simple curiosity and indicated that the bear might be actively seeking entry to the facility. The bear's investigation of the station's exterior revealed several potential vulnerabilities that had not been fully considered during the facility's design and construction. While the main structures were built to withstand extreme weather conditions and were elevated above ground level to prevent ice damage, they had not been specifically designed to resist determined investigation by an 800-pound predator equipped with claws capable of penetrating steel plating. Bear Alpha 7's exploration of the station's exterior quickly identified several areas where the structural integrity might be compromised by sustained attack. Elena's assessment of the bear's behavior patterns led her to conclude that Alpha 7 was not simply investigating the station out of curiosity, but was actively seeking access to the interior spaces, possibly attracted by food odors, human scent, or warmth emanating from the heated facility. This behavioral pattern was consistent with polar bears that had previous experience with human habitations and had learned to associate enclosed structures with food rewards or shelter opportunities. The implications of this assessment were deeply troubling, as it suggested that traditional deterrent methods would likely be ineffective against a bear that was actively motivated to gain entry to the facility. All stations, this is Elena with critical assessment update, she announced through the communication system, her voice reflecting the gravity of her conclusions. Bear Alpha 7 is displaying systematic investigation behavior consistent with active attempt to gain facility access rather than casual exploration. Current deterrent measures appear ineffective, and bear behavior suggests sustained interest in facility contents. Recommend immediate implementation of emergency evacuation procedures and request immediate external assistance for personnel extraction. Karen's response to Elena's assessment was swift and decisive, as her experience in Arctic research had taught her to trust the professional judgment of wildlife experts when human safety was at stake. The transition from deterrent attempts to evacuation procedures represented a significant escalation in the seriousness of their situation, but Karen recognized that the safety of her team members took absolute priority over research objectives or equipment protection. Her years of experience leading expeditions in dangerous environments had prepared her for making difficult decisions under pressure. All personnel prepare for immediate emergency evacuation via Protocol 8 procedures, Karen announced, her voice carrying the authority and urgency necessary to ensure rapid compliance with evacuation orders. Primary evacuation route via Snowmobile Bay Alpha, secondary route via emergency exit Charlie. If primary route becomes compromised, James, initiate emergency medical preparation for cold exposure treatment. Lisa, send immediate emergency communication requesting urgent rescue assistance and medical evacuation capabilities. Protocol 8 represented the most serious evacuation procedures available to the research team, designed for situations where immediate departure was necessary, from the facility was necessary regardless of weather conditions or other complicating factors. The protocol assumed that remaining within the facility posed greater risk to personnel safety than exposure to Arctic weather conditions, and called for abandonment of all non-essential equipment and supplies in favor of rapid evacuation to predetermined emergency shelter locations or rescue rendezvous points. The implementation of Protocol 8 evacuation procedures was complicated by the fact that Bear Alpha 7's position around the research station's perimeter placed him directly between the team members and their primary evacuation route to the snowmobile storage bay. The Bear's systematic investigation of the facility exterior meant that his location was constantly changing, making it difficult to predict safe routes for human movement outside the protective confines of the heated structures. Elena's monitoring of the bear's position and behavior patterns became crucial for timing evacuation movements to avoid direct confrontation. James Rodriguez began emergency medical preparations by assembling cold weather trauma kits and hypothermia treatment supplies that would be needed if team members suffered injuries or exposure during the evacuation process. His preparations included portable heating devices, emergency blankets, medical supplies for treating cold injuries, and communication equipment that would allow him to coordinate with medical evacuation aircraft during rescue operations. James's experience as a combat medic had taught him to prepare for worst-case scenarios while maintaining focus on immediate medical priorities. Lisa Wang's emergency communication with outside agencies initiated a complex rescue coordination process involving multiple agencies and jurisdictions across Alaska's emergency response network. Her initial distress call was received by the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center in Elmendorf Air Force Base, which immediately began coordinating response assets, including Alaska Air National Guard helicopter units, Coast Guard rescue aircraft, and emergency medical personnel from hospitals in Anchorage and Fairbanks. The coordination of rescue operations in Arctic conditions required careful planning to ensure that rescue aircraft and personnel were properly equipped and prepared for extreme weather operations. At 17:04 hours, Bear Alpha 7's investigation of the research station took a dramatic turn when he discovered the facility's waste management area, where food scraps and other organic materials were stored in supposedly bear-proof containers pending pickup by supply aircraft. The bear's powerful nose had no difficulty detecting the concentrated food odors emanating from the waste storage area, and his investigation of the containers quickly revealed that they were not truly bear-proof when confronted with the determination and physical capabilities of a large adult male polar bear. The destruction of the waste storage containers provided Bear Alpha 7 with immediate food rewards that significantly reinforced his interest in the research facility and confirmed his assessment that human structures contained valuable resources worth investigating. Elena watched in growing alarm as the bear consumed the contents of several waste containers while continuing to investigate other areas of the station's exterior. The food rewards were likely to make the bear more persistent in his attempts to access additional areas of the facility, potentially leading to sustained attempts to gain entry to the main structures. Elena's assessment of the deteriorating situation led her to conclude that evacuation might no longer be possible without direct confrontation with Bear Alpha 7, as the animal's position around the facility perimeter effectively blocked access to both primary and secondary evacuation routes. The bear's consumption of food rewards from the waste area had also increased his motivation to continue investigating the facility, making it unlikely that he would lose interest and depart voluntarily. Elena began preparing her tranquilizer rifle for possible use, while hoping that non-lethal methods would be sufficient to allow safe evacuation of the research team. "Critical situation update," Elena announced through the communication system, her professional training helping her maintain calm despite the gravity of their circumstances. Bear Alpha 7 has accessed waste storage area and received significant food rewards, increasing his motivation for continued facility investigation. Current bear position blocks both primary and secondary evacuation routes. Assess high probability that direct intervention will be required to enable safe personnel evacuation. The term direct intervention was Elena's professional euphemism for the use of tranquilizer darts or potentially lethal force to neutralize the bear threat and allow team evacuation. Elena's training and experience with large predators had prepared her for situations where human safety required aggressive action against dangerous wildlife, but she also understood that such measures carried significant risks and could easily escalate into life-threatening confrontations if not executed properly. The decision to employ direct intervention measures represented a critical threshold in the emergency response process. Karen's authorization for Elena to employ direct intervention measures reflected her recognition that their situation had deteriorated beyond the point where passive deterrence or evacuation avoidance could ensure team safety. Karen's experience leading research expeditions had taught her that decisive action was often necessary when wildlife encounters reached critical thresholds, and she trusted Elena's professional expertise to employ appropriate measures for neutralizing the bear threat while minimizing risks to team members. At 17:09 hours, Bear Alpha 7 completed his investigation and consumption of the waste storage materials and turned his attention to the main structures of the research facility, beginning a systematic examination of windows, doors, and other potential entry points that might provide access to the interior spaces where human scent and activity were most concentrated. His investigation quickly focused on the facility's main entrance, a reinforced steel door equipped with multiple locking mechanisms designed to withstand extreme weather conditions but not specifically engineered to resist determined attack by large predators. The bear's investigation of the main entrance door involved both scent analysis and physical testing of the door's structural integrity, using his massive paws and powerful jaw muscles to probe for weaknesses that might allow forced entry. Elena watched with growing alarm as Bear Alpha 7 applied increasing force to various aspects of the door assembly, testing hinges, locks, and frame connections with the systematic thoroughness that characterized his entire approach to investigating the research facility. The door's construction was robust, but Elena could see that sustained attack might eventually compromise its integrity. Elena's decision to employ direct intervention came when Bear Alpha 7 began showing clear signs of preparation for sustained attack on the main entrance door, positioning himself for maximum leverage while beginning to apply force levels that threatened the door's structural integrity. Elena's assessment was that the bear's behavior had crossed the threshold from investigation to active attempt at forced entry, requiring immediate action to protect the research team from potential bear intrusion into the facility's interior spaces. Implementing direct intervention, all personnel take cover and prepare for potential facility breach, Eleanor announced as she moved into position with her tranquilizer rifle, carefully choosing a firing position that would allow accurate shot placement while providing her with cover and escape routes if the tranquilizer proved ineffective. Elena's experience with tranquilizing large predators had taught her that success required not only accurate dart placement, but also careful timing and preparation for various possible bear responses to being darted. The tranquilizer dart struck Bear Alpha 7 in the left shoulder at 17:13 hours, delivering a carefully calculated dose of carfentanil designed to incapacitate an animal of his size and weight within 5 to 10 minutes of injection. Elena's shot placement was excellent, striking the bear in an area with good muscle mass and blood circulation that would ensure rapid absorption of the tranquilizer compound. However, polar bears were known for their ability to function effectively even when wounded or stressed, and Elena maintained her defensive position while monitoring the bear's response to the tranquilizer injection. Bear Alpha 7's initial reaction to the tranquilizer dart was anger rather than sedation, as the bear spun toward the source of the projectile and began searching for the threat that had struck him. His size and physical condition meant that the tranquilizer would require several minutes to take full effect, during which time he remained a dangerous and potentially aggressive animal who now perceived the research facility as a source of active threat rather than simply an object of curiosity. Elena realized immediately that her situation had become significantly more dangerous as she now faced an angry and aroused polar bear who was actively seeking to identify and confront the source of the attack. The bear's search for the source of the tranquilizer dart led him directly toward the window from which Elena had fired, his keen senses allowing him to identify the location despite the distance and the barrier represented by the facility's walls and windows. Elena watched in growing alarm as Bear Alpha 7 approached her position with obvious hostile intent, his massive size and evident anger making it clear that the window and surrounding wall structure might not provide adequate protection if the bear decided to attack the facility directly. Elena's backup plan involved retreating from her current position to a more secure location within the facility while maintaining surveillance of Bear Alpha 7's behavior and preparing additional deterrent measures in case the tranquilizer proved insufficient to neutralize the threat. However, her plan was complicated by her injured foot from the morning's evacuation, which reduced her mobility at a time when rapid movement might be necessary for survival. Elena's commitment to protecting her teammates meant that she was willing to accept personal risk to ensure that the bear's attention remained focused on her rather than other team members. At 17:16 hours, Bear Alpha 7's investigation of Elena's firing position led him to the reinforced window through which she had shot the tranquilizer dart, and his anger over being attacked prompted him to begin testing the window's structural integrity with increasing force. The window was constructed of impact-resistant polycarbonate, designed to withstand wind-driven debris and extreme temperature variations. But it had not been engineered to resist sustained attack by an enraged polar bear, applying focused force to specific vulnerable points. The first crack in the window appeared at 17:18 hours when Bear Alpha 7 struck the polycarbonate surface with his right paw, applying force that Elena estimated at over 2,000 pounds per square inch, concentrated on a relatively small impact area. The crack was small initially, but Elena recognized that it represented a critical compromise in the window's structural integrity that would likely lead to complete failure if the bear continued his attack. The facility's other windows were of identical construction, suggesting that none of them would be able to withstand sustained attack if Bear Alpha 7 decided to focus his aggression on gaining entry to the building. Elena's assessment of their deteriorating situation led her to conclude that tranquilizer effectiveness was insufficient to neutralize Bear Alpha 7 before he succeeded in breaking through the facility's external barriers, potentially giving him access to interior spaces where team members would be vulnerable to direct attack. The bear showed signs of increasing drowsiness from the tranquilizer, but his anger and determination appeared to be sustaining his aggressive behavior despite the chemical effects that should have incapacitated him by that point. Elena began preparing her backup weapon, a .44 Magnum revolver loaded with hard-cast bullets capable of penetrating polar bear's skull if lethal force became necessary for human survival. The decision to prepare lethal force represented a critical escalation in the emergency response process, as Elena's training and professional ethics emphasized the importance of preserving wildlife whenever possible while still protecting human life when the two priorities came into direct conflict. Elena's experience with dangerous wildlife encounters had taught her that the transition from non-lethal to lethal response measures required careful judgment and precise timing, as premature use of lethal force could result in unnecessary wildlife deaths, while delayed response could result in human casualties. At 17:21 hours, Bear Alpha 7 succeeded in creating a significant crack in the polycarbonate window that extended nearly halfway across the surface and appeared to be spreading with each additional impact. Eleanor realized that complete window failure was imminent and that the bear would likely have access to the facility's interior within minutes unless additional deterrent measures proved effective. The prospect of an 800-pound polar bear gaining access to the confined spaces of the research facility was terrifying, as team members would have limited mobility and few options for escape or defense in the event of direct confrontation. Elena's emergency communication to the rest of the team provided critical warning that facility breach was imminent and that all personnel should prepare for potential bear intrusion into the building's interior spaces. Her assessment was that the team had approximately 2 to 5 minutes before Bear Alpha 7 gained access to the facility, time that should be used for final defensive preparations and positioning team members in the most secure areas available within the building structure. All stations, emergency alert, facility breach imminent, Elena announced, her voice reflecting the critical nature of their situation while maintaining the professional calm necessary for effective emergency coordination. Bear Alpha 7 has compromised primary window integrity and will likely gain facility access within 5 minutes. All personnel move to Emergency Safe Room Delta and prepare for facility intrusion protocols. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Emergency Safe Room. Delta represented the most secure location within BARS 7, a reinforced interior space originally designed as a storm shelter that could protect personnel from extreme weather events, but which also served as the facility's last line of defense against wildlife intrusion. The safe room was constructed with reinforced steel walls, a heavy-duty door equipped with multiple locking mechanisms, and independent life support systems that could sustain 12 people for up to 72 hours in emergency conditions. The room also contained emergency communication equipment, medical supplies, and survival gear necessary for extended defensive situations. Karen immediately began coordinating the team's movement to Emergency Safe Room Delta, ensuring that all personnel understood the urgency of the situation while maintaining the discipline necessary to avoid panic that could compromise their survival. Her experience leading expeditions in dangerous environments had taught her that survival often depended on maintaining calm leadership and clear communication, even in the most terrifying circumstances. Karen's voice carried the authority necessary to ensure immediate compliance with emergency procedures, while also conveying confidence that proper execution of their emergency protocols would see them through the crisis safely. James Rodriguez abandoned his medical preparation activities and began moving critical emergency medical supplies to the safe room, prioritizing trauma treatment equipment that might be needed if team members suffered injuries during bear intrusion or evacuation attempts. His selection of medical supplies was based on his combat experience treating injuries in hostile environments, focusing on materials needed for treating lacerations, crush injuries, and hypothermia that were the most likely types of trauma in their current situation. James's calm efficiency under pressure helped maintain team morale while ensuring that they would have necessary medical capabilities if the situation deteriorated further. Sarah and Tom worked together to move essential research data and communication equipment to the safe room, understanding that their survival might depend on maintaining contact with rescue services and that years of irreplaceable scientific work could be lost if they failed to protect critical data during the emergency. Their selection process was necessarily rapid and focused on materials that were both irreplaceable and essential for survival, including satellite communication devices, GPS equipment, and backup power supplies that would allow continued operation of life support systems. Marcus and Ahmed secured the facility's primary power and heating systems to ensure continued operation during potential bear intrusion, understanding that loss of heat in -40-degree weather could prove fatal even if they survived direct encounter with Bear Alpha 7. Their work included activating emergency power protocols that would maintain critical systems even if primary power was disrupted, and securing fuel supplies that might be damaged or contaminated if the Bear gained access to mechanical areas of the facility. Bob Thompson maintained communication with rescue services while monitoring weather conditions that would affect potential evacuation operations, providing regular updates to rescue coordinators about the team's status and the deteriorating situation at BARS-7. His communications included detailed information about Bear Alpha 7's behavior and the timeline for potential facility breach, information that rescue services needed to plan appropriate response measures and ensure that rescue aircraft were equipped with necessary wildlife management capabilities. Lisa Wang worked to maintain computer systems and data backups while preparing communication equipment for potential evacuation, ensuring that rescue services would have access to all available information about the team's situation and that critical research data would survive even if the facility was completely destroyed. Her work included activating automatic data transmission protocols that would send copies of all research information to external servers, providing backup security for scientific work that represented years of effort and millions of dollars in research investment. At 17:24 hours, the polycarbonate window finally failed completely under Bear Alpha 7's sustained attack, creating an opening approximately 4 feet wide and 3 feet high that provided the massive animal with direct access to the facility's interior spaces. Elena watched in horror as the bear began squeezing through the opening, his enormous size making the process difficult but not impossible. The sight of 800 pounds of apex predator forcing his way into their protective shelter was one of the most terrifying experiences any of the team members had ever encountered. Bear Alpha 7's entry into the facility was complicated by his size relative to the window opening, requiring him to work methodically to enlarge the breach and position himself for safe passage through the jagged edges of the broken polycarbonate material. This process took several minutes and provided Elena with additional time to reach emergency safe room Delta. But it also meant that the bear was now committed to gaining access to the facility and was unlikely to be deterred by additional non-lethal measures. The tranquilizer effects were becoming more apparent in the bear's movements, but his determination and anger appeared to be sustaining his efforts despite increasing chemical impairment. Elena's retreat to the safe room was complicated by her injured foot and the need to maintain visual surveillance of Bear Alpha 7's progress while avoiding direct confrontation with the animal. Her path through the facility's corridors took her past several other potential access points that the bear might discover if his investigation of the interior continued, making her acutely aware of how vulnerable the team would be if Alpha 7 decided to conduct a systematic search of the building. Elena's professional assessment was that they had successfully reached the most secure location available, but that their safety was far from guaranteed. The sound of Bear Alpha 7 moving through the facility's corridors was audible to all team members gathered in emergency safe room Delta, a terrifying reminder that only a single reinforced door separated them from direct confrontation with one of the Arctic's most dangerous predators. The bear's movement patterns suggested systematic investigation of the interior spaces, possibly following human scent trails, or seeking the sources of warmth and food odors that had originally attracted him to the facility. Team members maintained absolute silence while Elena monitored bear activity through the safe room's periscope system. Elena's surveillance revealed that Bear Alpha 7's behavior within the facility was becoming increasingly erratic as the tranquilizer effects intensified, with the animal showing signs of disorientation and reduced coordination while still maintaining enough awareness and mobility to present a serious threat to human safety. The bear's investigation of the facility's interior included destruction of furniture and equipment as he searched for food sources or attempted to understand the unfamiliar environment. Elena's assessment was that the tranquilizer would eventually incapacitate the bear, but that the process might take up to 30 minutes and could involve significant additional property damage. Karen maintained communication with rescue services while coordinating the team's defensive positions within the safe room, ensuring that everyone understood emergency procedures for various possible scenarios, including extended siege by the bear, facility fire, or structural collapse that might force them to abandon their protected position. Her planning included consideration of how to evacuate injured team members if medical emergency arose during the crisis, and how to coordinate with rescue aircraft when they arrived at the scene. At 17:31 hours, Bear Alpha 7's investigation of the facility led him to the common area where the team had gathered for breakfast that morning, a space that retained concentrated human scent and food odors that attracted his continued attention. The bear's destruction of the common area included overturning furniture, destroying kitchen equipment, and consuming any available food materials while continuing to search for additional sources of nutrition or interesting stimuli. Elena's surveillance indicated that the bear was becoming less coordinated but remained actively engaged in investigating the facility. The team's emergency food and water supplies would sustain them for approximately 60 hours within the safe room, but Elena's assessment suggested that Bear Alpha 7 would likely succumb to tranquilizer effects within the next 20 to 30 minutes, potentially ending the immediate threat without requiring additional intervention. However, the bear's presence within the facility created ongoing risks related to structural damage, fire hazards from damaged electrical systems, and potential facility heating system failures that could prove fatal in extreme Arctic conditions. James Rodriguez monitored team members for signs of psychological stress and physical health problems related to confinement, extreme stress, and the traumatic experience of being trapped by a dangerous predator. His assessment indicated elevated stress levels and mild symptoms of shock among several team members, but no immediate medical emergencies that required intervention. James prepared medical supplies for treating potential psychological trauma and stress-related physical symptoms that might develop during extended confinement. At 17:38 hours, Bear Alpha 7's movements within the facility began showing clear signs of tranquilizer impairment, with the animal displaying obvious lack of coordination and appearing to have difficulty maintaining balance while walking. Elena's assessment was that the tranquilizer was finally taking full effect, and that the bear would likely lose consciousness within the next 10 to 15 minutes. However, she maintained vigilance and defensive readiness, understanding that tranquilized animals could still be dangerous, and that Bear Alpha 7's size meant that even impaired, he remained capable of causing serious injury or death. The gradual incapacitation of Bear Alpha 7 provided some relief to the team members confined in Emergency Safe Room Delta, but Elena emphasized that they should remain in defensive positions until she could confirm that the bear was completely unconscious and no longer posed any threat to human safety. Her professional experience had taught her that premature assumptions about animal incapacitation had led to serious injuries in previous wildlife management situations, and she was determined to ensure team safety through conservative assessment of the threat status. Lisa Wang's continued communication with rescue services provided regular updates on the situation within BARS 7. Including Bear Alpha 7's condition and the team's status within the emergency safe room. Her communications were crucial for helping rescue coordinators plan appropriate response measures, and ensure that arriving aircraft would be equipped with wildlife management personnel capable of safely handling an unconscious polar bear and assessing potential medical needs of team members who had experienced extreme psychological trauma. At 17:46 hours, Bear Alpha 7 finally collapsed in the facility's common area, succumbing to the tranquilizer effects after nearly 33 minutes of sustained activity following DART injection. Elena's surveillance confirmed that the bear was unconscious and breathing regularly, indicating successful non-lethal neutralization of the threat without permanent harm to the animal. However, Elena maintained defensive protocols while planning for the complex process of safely removing an unconscious 800-pound polar bear from the interior of their research facility. The successful neutralization of Bear Alpha 7 marked the end of the immediate threat to team safety, but it also began a new phase of the emergency that would require careful coordination with wildlife authorities, rescue services, and facility management personnel. The bear's presence within the facility created ongoing complications related to his eventual recovery from tranquilization, his safe removal from the building, and his long-term management to prevent future incidents of this type. Elena's post-incident assessment indicated that Bear Alpha 7 would likely remain unconscious for approximately 2 to 4 hours, providing a window of opportunity for rescue services to arrive and begin the complex process of bear removal and team evacuation. However, the bear's recovery from tranquilization would need to be carefully monitored to ensure that he did not regain consciousness while still within the facility, potentially creating a renewed threat to team safety or requiring additional tranquilizer intervention. Karen began planning for the team's eventual evacuation from Emergency Safe Room Delta, understanding that they would need to coordinate their movements carefully to avoid disturbing the unconscious bear. While also ensuring that all team members could be safely extracted from the facility. Her planning included consideration of medical evaluation for all team members, preservation of critical research data, and documentation of the incident for insurance and scientific purposes. The first rescue aircraft arrived at BARS 7 at 18:23 hours, a Alaska Air National Guard HH-60 Pave Hawk helicopter, equipped with specialized cold weather rescue equipment and staffed with personnel trained in Arctic emergency operations. The aircraft's arrival was coordinated with Elena's assessment of Bear Alpha 7's condition to ensure that rescue operations could proceed safely without risk of disturbing the tranquilized animal or creating additional complications for team evacuation. The helicopter crew included Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a wildlife veterinarian with extensive experience in large animal tranquilization and emergency wildlife management, who would be responsible for assessing Bear Alpha 7's condition and coordinating his safe removal from the research facility. Dr. Martinez's expertise was crucial for ensuring that the bear received appropriate medical care during his recovery from tranquilization, while also protecting the safety of rescue personnel and research team members during the evacuation process. Master Sergeant David Thompson, the helicopter's crew chief and a veteran of numerous Arctic rescue operations, coordinated the complex logistics of evacuating 12 research team members from the compromised facility, while also ensuring that rescue equipment and personnel were properly protected from extreme weather conditions. His experience with cold weather operations was essential for maintaining rescue aircraft performance in -40-degree temperatures, with sustained winds exceeding 20 miles per hour. The evacuation of research team members from Emergency Safe Room Delta began at 18:35 hours under carefully controlled conditions designed to minimize noise and movement that might disturb Bear Alpha 7's tranquilized sleep. Elena led the evacuation process, using her knowledge of the bear's condition and location to guide team members along routes that avoided the common area where Alpha 7 remained unconscious. Each team member was evacuated individually at timed intervals to reduce the risk of group movement, attracting unwanted attention. Karen was evacuated first as team leader, allowing her to coordinate with rescue personnel and provide detailed briefings on the incident while other team members were still being extracted from the facility. Her information was crucial for helping rescue coordinators understand the sequence of events that had led to the crisis and plan appropriate follow-up actions for wildlife management and facility security. Karen's professional assessment of the incident would later become a key component of official investigations and policy development for Arctic research operations. Sarah and Tom were evacuated together due to Tom's status as a non-essential civilian whose documentary work had been complicated by the emergency situation. Their evacuation proceeded smoothly, with both individuals showing signs of stress and exhaustion, but no serious medical problems requiring immediate intervention. Tom's camera equipment had been abandoned during the emergency retreat to the safe room, but his early footage of Bear Alpha 7's behavior would prove valuable for scientific analysis and public education purposes. Elena was evacuated last among the research team members, maintaining surveillance of Bear Alpha 7's condition until the final moments before her own departure from the facility. Her professional responsibility for wildlife safety required her to ensure that the bear remained unconscious and stable before abandoning her monitoring position. Elena's assessment was that Alpha 7 would likely remain unconscious for at least another 2 hours, providing adequate time for rescue operations to be completed safely. The medical evaluation of research team members was conducted aboard the rescue helicopter by Flight Medic Technical Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, whose assessment indicated that all team members had survived the ordeal without serious physical injury, but showed varying degrees of psychological stress and exhaustion consistent with survival of life-threatening emergency situations. Eleanor's frostbite injury from the morning evacuation was treated with warming protocols and protective bandaging that would allow healing during the evacuation to medical facilities in Anchorage. James Rodriguez received particular attention during medical evaluation due to his role as the team's medical officer and his knowledge of each team member's health status and medical history. His assessment of team member psychological condition was consistent with the flight medic's evaluation, indicating elevated stress levels and mild shock symptoms, but no immediate medical emergencies requiring urgent intervention. James's own psychological status was stable despite the trauma of the incident. Dr. Martinez's assessment of Bear Alpha 7 indicated that the animal was physiologically stable and recovering normally from tranquilizer effects, with vital signs consistent with healthy adult polar bear under chemical sedation. Her examination revealed no signs of injury or medical complications from the tranquilizer injection, and her professional assessment was that the bear would make a complete recovery within 6 to 8 hours of DART injection. Dr. Martinez's recommendations included continued monitoring during recovery and implementation of enhanced wildlife management protocols to prevent future incidents. The removal of Bear Alpha 7 from BARS 7 required specialized equipment and personnel trained in handling large, unconscious wildlife in extreme weather conditions. The process involved using a portable crane system to lift the bear through the damaged window opening and transport him to a safe recovery location approximately 2 miles from the research facility. The entire removal operation took nearly 3 hours and required coordination between wildlife management personnel, rescue services, and facility maintenance crews. The helicopter evacuation of research team members to medical facilities in Anchorage was completed by 20:47 hours on December 22nd, marking the end of the immediate emergency phase of the incident, but beginning an extended period of medical evaluation, psychological counseling, and official investigation that would continue for several months. The team's survival without serious physical injury was attributed to their comprehensive emergency preparedness training and the effective implementation of established safety protocols during crisis situations. The initial medical evaluation at Providence Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage revealed that all team members had survived the incident without lasting physical injury, though several individuals required treatment for minor cold exposure injuries, stress-related symptoms, and exhaustion from the prolonged emergency situation. Elena's frostbite injury was treated successfully with warming therapy and showed no signs of permanent tissue damage that would affect her long-term health or professional capabilities. Dr. Karen Olson was admitted to Providence Alaska Medical Center for observation and treatment of severe psychological stress related to her experience as team leader during the crisis, though her physical condition was stable and showed no signs of serious injury. Karen's professional assessment was that all team members had performed exceptionally well during the emergency, and that their survival was due to effective training, proper equipment, and successful execution of emergency protocols under extreme pressure. The psychological evaluation of team members was conducted by Dr. Patricia Williams, a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma recovery and survival psychology, whose assessment indicated that all individuals were experiencing normal stress responses to life-threatening situations, but showed no signs of severe psychological damage requiring long-term treatment. Dr. Williams's recommendations included short-term counseling support and gradual re-exposure to normal activities to help team members process their experience and return to normal psychological functioning. Tom Mitchell's documentary footage of the incident provided unprecedented documentation of polar bear behavior during human encounters and would later be used by wildlife authorities for educational purposes and behavioral analysis studies. His footage also served as crucial evidence for insurance claims related to facility damage and equipment loss, helping to document the sequence of events and bear behavior patterns that led to the facility breach. Tom's professional dedication to continuing his documentation work, even during life-threatening situations, was noted in official reports. The damage assessment at BARS 7 revealed extensive destruction throughout the facility, with total damages estimated at approximately $2.1 million, including structural repairs, equipment replacement, and facility reconstruction necessary to restore full operational capability. Bear Alpha 7's investigation of the facility had resulted in destruction of most scientific equipment, extensive damage to interior structures, and complete compromise of the facility's environmental integrity that would require major reconstruction efforts. The facility's heating system had suffered significant damage during Bear Alpha 7's investigation, with several critical components destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The loss of heating capability in extreme Arctic conditions meant that BARS 7 was uninhabitable until major repairs could be completed, effectively ending the research season and requiring postponement of all scheduled scientific activities until facility reconstruction could be completed during the following summer construction season. The National Science Foundation's investigation of the incident was led by Dr. Michael Chen, a wildlife management expert with extensive experience in Arctic research operations and human-wildlife conflict resolution. His investigation focused on identifying factors that had contributed to the incident and developing recommendations for preventing similar occurrences at other Arctic research facilities. Dr. Chen's preliminary assessment indicated that the incident was caused by a combination of unusual bear behavior, inadequate facility security measures, and environmental factors that had brought Bear Alpha 7 into extended contact with human activities. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's investigation was conducted by Special Agent Jennifer Martinez, whose expertise in polar bear behavior and wildlife law enforcement provided crucial insights into Bear Alpha 7's behavioral patterns and the legal implications of the incident for future wildlife management decisions. Agent Martinez's investigation included analysis of the bear's tracking data, assessment of previous human encounters, and evaluation of whether Alpha 7 represented an ongoing threat to public safety that might require management intervention. Bear Alpha 7's recovery from tranquilization proceeded normally, with the animal regaining consciousness approximately 4 hours after DART injection and showing no signs of injury or lasting effects from the tranquilizer. Wildlife authorities maintained surveillance of the bear for 72 hours following the incident to ensure normal behavior patterns and assess whether additional management intervention might be necessary. Alpha 7's post-incident behavior appeared normal, with the bear returning to typical hunting and territorial activities, without showing unusual interest in human activities. The insurance investigation of the incident was conducted by Arctic Specialty Insurance, whose assessment confirmed that the facility damage was covered under the research project's comprehensive policy, but also resulted in increased premiums and enhanced security requirements for future Arctic research operations. The insurance company's recommendations included installation of bear-resistant barriers, enhanced early warning systems, and improved emergency response capabilities that would reduce the likelihood of similar incidents in the future. The media coverage of the incident attracted international attention to the challenges and dangers facing Arctic researchers, with news reports focusing on the dramatic nature of the bear attack and the successful survival of all team members. The publicity surrounding the incident led to increased public awareness of polar bear conservation issues and the scientific importance of Arctic research, though it also raised questions about the safety and cost-effectiveness of conducting research in such dangerous environments. Dr. Elena Kowalski's professional assessment of the incident emphasized that Bear Alpha 7's behavior was unusual but not unprecedented, and that similar incidents could potentially occur at other Arctic research facilities unless enhanced wildlife management protocols were implemented. Her recommendations included improved bear deterrent systems, enhanced facility security measures, and better coordination between research operations and wildlife authorities to prevent dangerous encounters before they escalated to crisis levels. The long-term psychological impact of the incident varied among team members, with most individuals recovering normal psychological functioning within 6 to 8 weeks of the attack, through counseling and gradual return to normal activities. Elena's professional performance during the crisis was widely praised by wildlife authorities and emergency response personnel, though she required several months of counseling to fully process the traumatic experience of being responsible for team safety during such extreme circumstances. Karen's leadership during the crisis was credited with saving the lives of all team members through effective decision-making and successful implementation of emergency procedures under extreme pressure. Her experience during the incident led to her appointment as a consultant for Arctic research safety protocol development and her testimony before congressional committees investigating Arctic research safety and funding issues. Karen's professional recovery was complicated by feelings of responsibility for the incident and concern for team member welfare, requiring extended counseling and gradual return to Arctic research activities. The scientific value of the research data collected before the incident was preserved through Lisa Wang's data backup procedures, ensuring that weeks of valuable scientific work were not lost despite the destruction of the research facility. The data provided important insights into polar bear behavior and climate change effects that contributed to scientific understanding of Arctic ecosystem changes and wildlife adaptation strategies. The research findings were published in several peer-reviewed journals and contributed to international climate change research and conservation planning efforts. The reconstruction of BARS 7 began during the summer of 2025 and incorporated numerous security and safety improvements designed to prevent similar incidents while still allowing effective scientific research in polar bear habitat. The new facility design included bear-resistant windows and doors, enhanced early warning systems, improved emergency communication capabilities, and better coordination with wildlife authorities for rapid response to bear encounters. The reconstruction cost exceeded $3.2 million and required 16 months to complete. The incident at BARS 7 led to significant changes in Arctic research protocols and safety requirements across North America and other polar regions, with research institutions implementing enhanced bear deterrent systems, improved emergency response capabilities, and better coordination with wildlife authorities. The lessons learned from Bear Alpha 7's attack on the research facility influenced policy development for Arctic research operations and contributed to improved safety standards for researchers working in dangerous wildlife habitats. Bear Alpha 7 continued to be monitored by wildlife authorities for several months following the incident, but his behavior patterns returned to normal, and he showed no signs of continued interest in human activities or structures. The bear was eventually removed from enhanced monitoring status and returned to routine wildlife management protocols, though his unique identification and behavioral history remained in wildlife databases for future reference if additional incidents occurred. The December 22, 2024 attack on BARS 7 by Bear Alpha 7 remains one of the most thoroughly documented polar bear attacks on human facilities in scientific literature, providing valuable insights into polar bear behavior, human-wildlife conflict resolution, and emergency response procedures in extreme environments. The incident highlighted both the dangers and the scientific importance of Arctic research, while demonstrating that proper training, equipment, and emergency procedures could enable survival even in the most extreme circumstances. The legacy of the incident continues to influence Arctic research operations and wildlife management policies, serving as a case study for training programs and emergency preparedness protocols. The survival of all 12 team members without serious injury stands as testimony to the effectiveness of comprehensive safety training and emergency preparedness in dangerous research environments, while the facility destruction and reconstruction costs serve as reminders of the serious risks and expenses associated with conducting scientific research in polar bear habitat. Dr. Karen Olsen's research on polar bear behavior and climate change adaptation continued following her recovery from the incident, though her work was modified to incorporate enhanced safety protocols and better coordination with wildlife authorities. Her experience during the Bear Alpha 7 attack made her a sought-after expert on research safety and human-wildlife conflict resolution, leading to consulting work with research institutions and government agencies developing improved safety standards for Arctic operations. The final investigation report, completed 18 months after the incident, concluded that the attack was caused by a combination of factors, including Bear Alpha 7's unusual persistence in investigating human activities, inadequate facility security measures for extreme wildlife encounters, and environmental conditions that had increased bear mobility and hunger levels during the critical winter hunting season. The report's recommendations were implemented at Arctic research facilities across North America and contributed to significant improvements in researcher safety and wildlife management protocols. The scientific and educational value derived from the incident, including Tom Mitchell's unprecedented footage of polar bear behavior and the detailed documentation of emergency response procedures, helped justify the significant costs and risks associated with Arctic research operations. The lessons learned from the Bear Alpha 7 incident continue to inform research safety protocols and wildlife management strategies, ensuring that future Arctic researchers benefit from the harrowing experience of the BARS 7 team on that terrifying December day when a massive polar bear turned their scientific mission into a fight for survival in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. The next stories. Bear mauls elderly hiker in 7 minutes, July 6, 2024. The morning of July 4, 2024, began with the kind of crystalline Montana sky that had drawn Martha Louise Phillips to Glacier National Park every summer for the past 17 years. At 71, with silver hair pulled back in her characteristic tight bun and wearing the same faded REI hiking boots she'd owned since 2007, Martha stood at the kitchen window of her rented cabin on Lake McDonald, watching the sun paint the peaks of the Continental Divide in shades of rose gold and amber. The thermometer outside read 42 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect weather for what she had planned to be her most ambitious solo hike yet. Martha had arrived at the park 3 days earlier, driving her well-maintained 2019 Toyota Highlander from her home in Billings, Montana, a journey of 347 miles that she had made so many times she could navigate it in her sleep. This year's visit held special significance. It marked not only her retirement after 43 years as a high school mathematics teacher at Billings Central Catholic High School, but also what she privately considered her farewell tour of the wilderness that had shaped her adult life. Her daughter, Sarah Phillips Chen, a pediatric surgeon living in Portland, Oregon, had been increasingly vocal about her concerns regarding Martha's solo hiking adventures, particularly after Martha had taken a minor fall on the Highline Trail the previous August, resulting in a sprained ankle and a night spent in the Apgar Medical Clinic. The cabin Martha had rented, a modest 2-bedroom structure at 4847 Going to the Sun Road, sat approximately 3.2 miles from the park's west entrance and had been her base of operations for 7 consecutive summers. The owner, a weathered former park ranger named Douglas McKinnon, had grown fond of his reliable tenant who always left the place cleaner than she found it and never complained about the temperamental water heater or the family of ground squirrels that had taken up residence under the front porch. This year, Douglas had noticed that Martha seemed different somehow, more introspective, spending longer periods sitting on the small deck with her morning coffee, staring out at the lake with an expression he couldn't quite identify. Over breakfast that Independence Day morning, Martha reviewed her hiking plans for the weekend. She had scheduled an ambitious itinerary that would culminate on July 6th with a solo traverse of the Grinnell Glacier Trail, a moderately strenuous 5-mile round-trip hike that she'd completed 6 times previously, though never alone. The trail, which began at the Many Glacier Hotel and wound through some of the park's most spectacular alpine scenery, featured an elevation gain of 1,600 feet and typically required 4 to 6 hours to complete. Martha's hiking journal, a leather-bound notebook she had maintained meticulously since her first visit to Glacier in 2007, contained detailed notes about each of her previous traverses of this particular trail, including weather conditions, wildlife sightings, and precise timing for each segment of the route. The Many Glacier area of the park, located in the northeastern section and accessible via a winding 40-mile drive from the west entrance, was renowned for its pristine alpine lakes, dramatic glacial cirques, and abundant wildlife. The region's ecosystem supported one of the densest populations of grizzly bears in the continental United States, with current estimates suggesting approximately 300 individual bears inhabited the Greater Glacier National Park ecosystem. The Grinnell Glacier Trail itself passed through prime grizzly habitat, including extensive huckleberry patches that served as crucial food sources during the late summer months leading up to hibernation. Martha's decision to hike this trail solo was not made lightly. She had spent considerable time studying current bear activity reports, consulting with park rangers at the Many Glacier Ranger Station, and reviewing the latest trail conditions. Her preparation routine, developed over nearly 2 decades of wilderness hiking, was thorough and systematic. Her backpack, a well-broken-in Osprey Kestrel 48, contained the standard 10 essentials plus additional safety equipment specifically chosen for bear country. A canister of counter-assault bear spray with a range of 30 feet, a Garmin InReach satellite communicator for emergency situations beyond cell phone coverage, and a lightweight bear bell that she typically attached to her trekking poles. The weather forecast for July 6th called for partly cloudy skies, with temperatures ranging from a morning low of 39 degrees to an afternoon high of 74 degrees, with wind speeds of 5 to 10 miles per hour from the southwest. These conditions were considered ideal for hiking, with minimal risk of afternoon thunderstorms that could create dangerous conditions on exposed ridgelines. Martha had checked and double-checked the National Park Service website for any trail closures or wildlife warnings, finding none that would affect her planned route. On the evening of July 5th, Martha had dinner at the Many Glacier Hotel dining room, where she struck up a conversation with Tom Rodriguez, a 54-year-old wildlife photographer from Santa Fe, New Mexico, who was staying at the hotel while working on a project documenting the park's grizzly bear population. Tom, a soft-spoken man with graying temples and weathered hands that spoke of decades spent in outdoor environments, had been visiting Glacier National Park annually for the past 12 years, always timing his trips to coincide with the peak of huckleberry season when bear activity was most predictable. During their conversation, which lasted nearly 2 hours over coffee and huckleberry pie, Tom shared his observations about recent bear behavior in the Many Glacier area. He had documented at least 7 different individual grizzlies in the vicinity of the Grinnell Glacier Trail system over the past 10 days, including a large boar that he estimated to weigh approximately 600 pounds and a sow with 2 yearling cubs who had been frequenting the lower elevations near Josephine Lake. Tom's field notes, which he showed to Martha, indicated that bear activity had been particularly heavy along the switchbacks between Upper Grinnell Lake and the Glacier Overlook, an area where hikers were required to make noise and remain alert. Tom offered to accompany Martha on her planned hike, an offer that gave her pause. She appreciated his expertise and the safety that would come with hiking in a group, but she had specifically planned this trip as a solo endeavor, part of her personal process of coming to terms with the gradual reduction in her physical capabilities and her eventual withdrawal from the wilderness activities that had defined her retirement years. After considerable internal debate, she politely declined his offer but agreed to check in with him via text message at predetermined intervals using her satellite communicator. That evening, Martha returned to her hotel room, a modest accommodation on the 3rd floor of the historic Many Glacier Hotel with a view of Swift Current Lake, and conducted her final preparations for the morning hike. She laid out her clothing systematically: moisture-wicking synthetic base layers, a fleece mid-layer, a waterproof shell jacket, convertible hiking pants, wool hiking socks, and her trusted Salomon Quest 4 DGTX hiking boots that she had resoled twice and which bore the scuff marks and scratches of thousands of miles on mountain trails. Her food preparation was equally meticulous. Martha packed high-energy snacks in bear-proof containers, mixed nuts, dried fruit, energy bars, jerky, and her favorite trail lunch of peanut butter and honey sandwiches on whole-grain bread. She filled her 3-liter hydration system with filtered water and added electrolyte tablets to 2 additional water bottles. Every item of food was sealed in odor-proof packaging and stored in the approved bear canister that she had purchased specifically for this trip. The morning of July 6th arrived with a gentle alarm at 5:30 a.m. Martha had slept fitfully, her mind cycling through route details and safety protocols. She dressed quickly and efficiently, decades of early morning departures having refined her routine to a precise sequence of actions. By 6:15 a.m., she was seated in the hotel dining room for a substantial breakfast of oatmeal, fresh berries and coffee, fueling her body for the physical demands ahead. At 7 a.m. sharp, Martha signed out at the Many Glacier Ranger Station, providing detailed information about her intended route, expected return time, and emergency contact information. The duty ranger, a 28-year-old seasonal employee named Jessica Whitehorse from the Blackfeet Nation, reviewed Martha's hiking plan and noted her extensive experience in the area. Jessica mentioned that there had been no unusual bear activity reported in the past 48 hours, but she reminded Martha to remain vigilant, make noise on blind corners, and to immediately report any wildlife encounters upon her return. The trailhead parking area was already bustling with activity despite the early hour. Martha observed approximately 24 other vehicles, ranging from rental cars to elaborate RVs, suggesting that the trail would be reasonably busy throughout the day. This traffic was generally considered a positive safety factor, as bears typically avoided areas with high human activity. She completed a final equipment check, testing her bear spray to ensure the safety mechanism functioned properly, verifying that her satellite communicator had a clear signal with 4 bars of connectivity, and adjusting her trekking pole straps for optimal comfort. At 7:23 a.m., Martha began her hike at the official Grinnell Glacier trailhead, located at an elevation of 4,878 feet above sea level. The initial segment of the trail followed a wide, well-maintained path along the shoreline of Swift Current Lake, a picturesque alpine lake that reflected the towering peaks of Mount Wilbur and Mount Henkel in its still morning waters. The surface temperature of the lake was approximately 52 degrees Fahrenheit, creating wisps of mist that added an ethereal quality to the early morning light. Martha's pace was steady and sustainable, approximately 2.2 miles per hour on level terrain, a rhythm she had developed over years of long-distance hiking. She used trekking poles to reduce stress on her knees, a concession to age that she had initially resisted but had grown to appreciate. Her breathing was controlled and regular, her heart rate elevated but well within the aerobic zone, appropriate for sustained effort. The familiar cadence of her footsteps and the gentle clicking of her trekking poles against the rocky trail created a meditative rhythm that allowed her mind to settle into the contemplative state she treasured during solo hikes. The first mile of the trail passed without incident. Martha encountered 3 other hiking parties, a young couple from Germany who were visiting American national parks during a month-long vacation, a family of 5 from Minneapolis, including 3 children between the ages of 8 and 14, and 2 women in their 40s, who appeared to be experienced hikers based on their equipment and steady pace. Each encounter involved the standard trail courtesies of greeting, brief conversation about trail conditions, and mutual wishes for a safe and enjoyable hike. At 8:15 a.m., Martha reached the junction with the boat shuttle dock at the head of Swift Current Lake, where hikers had the option of taking a tour boat across both Swift Current Lake and Lake Josephine, reducing the hiking distance by approximately 1.8 miles. Martha had used this option on previous visits when hiking with less experienced companions, but today she chose to continue on foot, relishing the gradual warm-up that the additional mileage provided. The trail around Lake Josephine was particularly beautiful in the morning light, with opportunities to observe waterfowl and the occasional moose browsing in the shallow bays. The segment between Swift Current Lake and Lake Josephine featured relatively gentle terrain, with an elevation gain of only 200 feet over 1.2 miles. The trail's surface consisted of compacted earth interspersed with sections of wooden boardwalk designed to protect sensitive wetland areas and prevent erosion. Martha's field notes from previous hikes indicated that this section typically required 30 to 40 minutes to complete, depending on conditions and the number of photographic stops. As she walked, Martha reflected on the changes she had observed in the park over her 17 years of visits. Climate change had dramatically altered the landscape, with glaciers retreating at an unprecedented rate and tree-line elevations shifting higher up the mountain slopes. The Grinnell Glacier itself had lost approximately 40% of its surface area since her first visit in 2007, a visible reminder of the environmental changes occurring throughout the northern Rocky Mountain ecosystem. These observations had added a sense of urgency to her hiking, a feeling that she was witnessing the final chapters of landscapes that might not exist in their current form for future generations. At 8:47 a.m., Martha reached the head of Lake Josephine and began the more challenging portion of the hike. The trail now began its steady climb toward Upper Grinnell Lake, gaining 800 feet of elevation over the next 1.5 miles. This section featured a series of switchbacks carved into the steep valley wall, with increasingly spectacular views back toward the lake and the surrounding peaks. The trail surface became more technical, incorporating loose rock, exposed roots, and occasional sections requiring careful foot placement. Martha's pace naturally slowed as the gradient increased. She implemented the hiking technique known as the rest step, pausing briefly with each step to allow her muscles to recover and maintain sustainable effort. Her breathing deepened but remained controlled, and she paused every 15 minutes for brief water breaks and to admire the expanding views. The morning air was crisp and carried the scent of alpine fir and the faint sweetness of early wildflowers blooming in protected microenvironments. During one of these rest stops, at approximately 9:20 a.m., Martha sent her first scheduled check-in message to Tom Rodriguez using her satellite communicator. The message read, "Making good progress up switchbacks. Weather perfect. Beautiful morning. ETA Upper Grinnell Lake, 10:30. The message transmitted successfully, and she received Tom's reply within 3 minutes. "Excellent. I'm positioned near Hotel Dock with telephoto lens. May catch glimpse of you on return, if timing works." The encounter that would change everything began not with drama, but with a series of subtle signs that Martha, despite her experience, either missed or misinterpreted. At 9:35 a.m., as she navigated the fourth switchback above Lake Josephine, Martha noticed what appeared to be fresh bear scat on the trail, approximately 18 inches from the main path. The scat was dark brown to black in color, cylindrical in shape with a diameter of roughly 2 inches, and contained visible remnants of berries and plant material. Based on its appearance and the lack of weather exposure, Martha estimated it had been deposited within the past 12 to 24 hours. Following standard bear country protocol, Martha increased her noise production, calling out, "Hey bear!" every 30 to 40 seconds and allowing her bear bell to ring more freely by adjusting her pace to create more pronounced movement of her trekking poles. She also removed her bear spray from its holster on her pack's hip belt and transferred it to a more readily accessible position in her left cargo pocket, ensuring the safety mechanism was in the proper position for immediate deployment. What Martha could not have known was that she was being observed. Approximately 150 yards ahead of her position, concealed in a dense thicket of serviceberry and mountain ash, a massive male grizzly bear was feeding on the season's early huckleberry crop. The bear, later estimated by wildlife biologists to weigh approximately 580 pounds and measure 7 feet 3 inches from nose to tail, was in his prime at an estimated age of 15 years. His dark brown coat showed the distinctive silver-tipped guard hairs that gave grizzly bears their name, and his shoulder hump, composed of the powerful muscle mass that enables these animals to dig and manipulate their environment, rose nearly 4 feet above the ground when he stood on all fours. This particular bear had been tracked by park biologists for several years and was known as Bear 211 in the official monitoring system. His range encompassed approximately 40 square miles of prime habitat in the Many Glacier area, and his behavior patterns had been documented through GPS collar data and observational studies. Bear 211 was considered a non-problematic animal with no history of aggressive encounters with humans, though his large size and dominant status in the local bear hierarchy made him a formidable presence in the ecosystem. On this particular morning, Bear 211 was engaged in hyperphagia, the intensive feeding behavior that grizzlies exhibit during late summer as they prepare for hibernation. This biological imperative drives bears to consume up to 20,000 calories per day, and the rich huckleberry patches along the Grinnell Glacier Trail provided an ideal foraging opportunity. The bear had been feeding in this location since approximately dawn, systematically working through patches of ripe berries with the methodical efficiency that characterizes grizzly foraging behavior. The first indication of Martha's approach that registered with Bear 211 was not visual, but auditory. The rhythmic clicking of her trekking poles, combined with her periodic "Hey Bear" calls, created a sound pattern that the bear's acute hearing detected from a distance of approximately 200 yards. Initially, this human presence was merely noted rather than perceived as a threat. Bear 211 had encountered hundreds of hikers over the years and had learned that most humans followed predictable patterns, staying on established trails and maintaining enough distance to avoid confrontations. However, as Martha continued her steady progress up the switchbacks, several factors began to create a potentially dangerous situation. The wind, which had been blowing from the southwest at 5 to 8 miles per hour earlier in the morning, had shifted to a more variable pattern with occasional gusts from the northeast. This change meant that Martha's scent was being carried directly toward Bear 211's position, while the bear's scent was not reaching Martha's location. Additionally, the dense vegetation surrounding the huckleberry patches created natural visual barriers that prevented either party from seeing the other until they would be in relatively close proximity. At 9:52 a.m., Martha reached the 7th switchback, bringing her to within 75 yards of Bear 211's feeding area. At this point, the bear made a decision that would prove fateful. Instead of moving away from the approaching human, as would be typical behavior, Bear 211 chose to remain in position and continue feeding. Several factors may have influenced this decision. The exceptional quality and quantity of berries in this particular patch, the bear's high energy requirements during hyperphagia, and possibly a mild habituation to human presence developed over years of encounters with hikers who maintained appropriate distances. Martha, meanwhile, was experiencing the euphoria that often accompanies successful mountain hiking. Her body had found its rhythm, her breathing was steady despite the altitude and exertion, and the spectacular scenery was providing the spiritual nourishment she had sought from this solo adventure. At 10:07 a.m., she paused at a scenic overlook to photograph Upper Grinnell Lake, which had come into view as a brilliant turquoise jewel set in a cirque of towering granite peaks. She sent a second check-in message to Tom at Overlook above Upper Grinnell Lake. Incredible views. Feeling strong, continuing to Glacier Viewpoint. The response came quickly. Fantastic. Be extra careful on final approach. Terrain gets technical. Weather still perfect from my view. Martha resumed hiking at 10:12 a.m., following the trail as it contoured around the eastern shore of Upper Grinnell Lake. This section of the trail was considered the most challenging portion of the hike, featuring loose scree, exposed bedrock, and several stream crossings that required careful foot placement. The elevation had reached 6,120 feet, and the air was noticeably thinner, requiring more frequent rest stops to maintain her target heart rate and avoid overexertion. At 10:28 a.m., Martha encountered a group of 4 hikers who were descending from the Glacier Viewpoint. The group consisted of 2 couples in their 30s, well-equipped and apparently experienced based on their efficient packing and steady downhill pace. The brief conversation that ensued would later prove significant to the investigation that followed. "How are the trail conditions ahead?" Martha asked, as was standard protocol when meeting descending hikers. "Pretty good overall," replied David Chen, a software engineer from Seattle who was leading the group. "A couple of sketchy stream crossings, but nothing too technical. We saw some fresh bear sign about a quarter-mile up, so keep making noise." "What kind of sign?" Martha inquired, her level of alertness increasing. "Looked like fresh diggings along the trail," answered Chen's hiking partner Rebecca Martinez, a nurse practitioner who had hiked extensively throughout the Pacific Northwest. "Probably looking for ground squirrels or marmots. Also saw what might have been tracks near the second stream crossing, but the ground was pretty churned up from other hikers." Martha thanked them for the information and continued upward, increasing her noise production as recommended. However, what the descending hikers had not mentioned, because they had not observed it, was that their passage through Bear 211's feeding area had caused the bear to move to a new location, approximately 40 yards closer to the main trail. This displacement put the bear in a position where an encounter with the next ascending hiker had become virtually inevitable. The final segment of trail leading to the Glacier Viewpoint covered 0.3 miles with an elevation gain of 280 feet over terrain that alternated between loose talus and sections of bare granite. Martha's pace had slowed considerably due to the technical nature of the hiking and the effects of altitude, and she was now making approximately 1.5 miles per hour. Her breathing was labored but controlled, and she paused every 8 to 10 minutes for water and brief rest stops. At 10:47 a.m., Martha reached what would later be identified as the location of initial contact with Bear 211. She had just negotiated a particularly challenging section of trail that required scrambling over a series of granite boulders when she rounded a blind corner formed by a large outcropping of rock. The encounter began at a distance of approximately 35 feet, well within the critical reaction zone for both human and bear. Martha's first glimpse of Bear 211 came as the massive animal raised his head from a huckleberry bush, purple juice staining his muzzle and chin. For a frozen moment that seemed to extend far longer than its actual duration of perhaps 2 seconds, human and bear stared at each other in mutual surprise. Martha's training and years of hiking in bear country immediately kicked in, and she began to follow the protocols she had rehearsed mentally countless times. She avoided direct eye contact, which bears can interpret as a threat or challenge, and began to speak in a calm, steady voice. "Hey bear, easy bear, I'm backing away slowly." She started to step backward carefully, avoiding sudden movements that might trigger a defensive response. Her right hand moved slowly toward the bear spray in her left cargo pocket, while her left hand reached for her trekking poles, which she had momentarily set aside during the boulder scramble. Bear 211's initial response was consistent with normal bear behavior when surprised by humans at close range. He stood on his hind legs to get a better view and scent reading of the intruder, rising to his full height of approximately 8 feet 6 inches. This posturing behavior, while intimidating to humans, is typically not aggressive, but rather investigative. The bear's ears were forward and alert, his nose working to process the complex scent information that would help him assess the threat level of the situation. For approximately 15 seconds, the standoff continued with both parties evaluating their options. Martha continued her slow backward retreat while maintaining her calm verbal communication with the bear. She had successfully retrieved her bear spray and removed the safety clip, holding the canister in the proper deployment position with her thumb on the trigger mechanism. The wind conditions were favorable for bear spray use, blowing from her left to right at approximately 6 miles per hour, which would carry the spray toward the bear while minimizing the risk of blowback. What happened next would be debated extensively by wildlife experts and park officials in the investigation that followed. Bear 211 dropped to all fours and began to approach Martha, moving at what biologists classify as a deliberate walk rather than a charge. This behavior could indicate several different intentions: investigative curiosity, territorial assertion, or the beginning stages of defensive aggression. The bear's head was lowered, his ears were back, and he was making a series of huffing vocalizations that are typically associated with stress or agitation. Martha, recognizing that the bear was not retreating as she had hoped, made the decision to deploy her bear spray when the animal reached a distance of approximately 20 feet. This decision was consistent with expert recommendations for bear spray use, which specify deployment at distances between 15 and 25 feet for optimal effectiveness. She aimed slightly downward to account for the spray's trajectory and activated the trigger mechanism, releasing a cone-shaped cloud of capsaicin-based deterrent toward the approaching bear. The initial deployment of bear spray appeared to be successful. Bear 211 was enveloped in the orange-colored cloud of capsaicin, and he immediately stopped his forward progress, shaking his head vigorously and pawing at his eyes and nose. For a moment, Martha felt a surge of relief, believing that the encounter would end with the bear retreating, as had occurred in the vast majority of documented bear spray deployments. However, several factors combined to escalate the situation beyond the typical bear spray success story. The wind, which had been steady from the left, suddenly shifted to a more turbulent pattern, with gusts coming from multiple directions. This change caused some of the spray to blow back toward Martha, affecting her vision and breathing. Additionally, Bear 211's reaction to the spray, while initially appearing to be retreat behavior, quickly transformed into what wildlife experts would later classify as pain-induced aggression. Rather than fleeing from the source of his discomfort, Bear 211 associated Martha with the painful stimulus he was experiencing and made the decision to eliminate what he perceived as a threat. The bear's demeanor changed dramatically, with his ears flattening completely against his head, his lips pulling back to expose his teeth, and his vocalizations changing from huffs to growls and roars. These signs indicated that the encounter had transitioned from a defensive response to active aggression. At 10:48 a.m., Bear 211 charged Martha from a distance of approximately 18 feet. The charge itself covered the distance in less than 2 seconds, as grizzly bears can reach speeds of up to 35 miles per hour over short distances. Martha attempted to deploy additional bear spray during the charge, but the combination of her compromised vision from spray blowback, the speed of the bear's approach, and her own adrenaline-induced motor function changes prevented effective use of the deterrent. Martha's final actions before physical contact demonstrated both her experience and her courage under extreme circumstances. Unable to outrun or effectively deter the charging bear, she dropped to the ground and assumed the defensive position recommended for grizzly bear attacks. Lying face down with her hands clasped behind her neck to protect her cervical spine, her elbows protecting the sides of her face, and her legs spread slightly to make it more difficult for the bear to flip her over. The initial impact occurred at 10:48 a.m. and 23 seconds. Bear 211, traveling at an estimated speed of 25 miles per hour at contact, struck Martha with a force that wildlife experts estimated to be equivalent to being hit by a small motorcycle. The bear's 580-pound mass, combined with his momentum, created an impact force of approximately 2,800 pounds per square foot at the point of contact. Martha's body was immediately thrown from her defensive position and tumbled approximately 8 feet down the steep slope adjacent to the trail. The attack that followed was swift, brutal, and consistent with the predatory behavior that grizzly bears occasionally exhibit when they perceive humans as prey rather than threats. This behavioral shift, while extremely rare, represents one of the most dangerous scenarios possible in bear country, as it overrides the bear's natural tendency to cease attacks once the perceived threat has been neutralized. Bear 211's first actions focused on Martha's head and neck area, the typical target zones for predatory attacks. The bear's jaws, capable of exerting bite pressure exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch, caused massive trauma to Martha's skull and cervical vertebrae. Her hiking helmet, a lightweight model designed primarily for rockfall protection, provided minimal defense against the bear's bite force and was crushed and displaced within the first few seconds of the attack. The timeline of the attack, later reconstructed through forensic evidence, audio analysis of Martha's satellite communicator, which had been activated during the encounter, and examination of the scene, indicated that the active mauling continued for approximately 4 minutes and 37 seconds. During this time, Martha remained conscious for an unknown period, as evidenced by defensive wounds on her hands and arms, where she'd attempted to protect herself despite the severity of her injuries. Bear 211's attack pattern was methodical and devastating. After the initial focus on Martha's head and neck, the bear used his powerful forepaws to inflict massive lacerations across her torso and extremities. The bear's claws, measuring up to 4 inches in length and kept sharp through constant use in digging and climbing, created wounds that penetrated deep into muscle tissue and caused severe blood loss. The bear's behavior during this phase of the attack was consistent with feeding behavior, indicating that the animal had transitioned fully into predatory mode. The attack concluded as abruptly as it had begun. At 10:52 a.m. and 47 seconds, Bear 211 ceased his mauling of Martha and moved approximately 15 feet away from her body. The reason for this sudden cessation of aggressive behavior remains unclear, though wildlife experts theorized that the bear may have been responding to sounds from other hikers on the trail below, or that his stress-induced aggressive state had naturally resolved once he perceived the threat to be eliminated. Martha Phillips died at 10:53 a.m. on July 6, 2024, on the Grinnell Glacier Trail at an elevation of 6,247 feet above sea level. The official cause of death, as determined by the Flathead County Coroner's Office, was massive blood loss resulting from multiple traumatic injuries inflicted by a large carnivore. The coroner's report noted that Martha had sustained injuries that would have been incompatible with survival, even if immediate advanced medical care had been available. The discovery of Martha's remains occurred at 11:17 a.m., when a group of 6 hikers ascending the trail encountered the scene of the attack. The group, led by Dr. Michael Torres, an emergency room physician from Phoenix, Arizona, immediately recognized the situation as a fatal bear attack and implemented appropriate safety protocols. Dr. Torres used his satellite communication device to contact park dispatch, while the other members of his party secured the area and ensured that Bear 211 was no longer in the immediate vicinity. The initial emergency response was coordinated by Chief Ranger William Hartley, a 23-year veteran of the National Park Service with extensive experience in wilderness emergency response. Upon receiving the report of a fatal bear attack at 11:19 a.m., Hartley immediately activated the park's critical incident response team and initiated contact with multiple agencies, including the Flathead County Sheriff's Office, Glacier County Search and Rescue, the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Bear Management Team, and the Park Service's Investigative Services Branch. The first responders to reach the scene were park rangers Jennifer Walsh and Marcus Running Bear, who arrived via helicopter at 11:47 a.m. Both rangers were certified emergency medical technicians with specialized training in wilderness medicine and wildlife attack response. Their initial assessment confirmed that Martha had died as a result of the attack and that immediate medical intervention was not required. They established a security perimeter around the scene and began the preliminary documentation process required for the investigation. The evacuation of Martha's remains presented significant logistical challenges due to the remote location of the attack site and the continued presence of Bear 211 in the area. The helicopter evacuation was delayed for nearly 2 hours, while park wildlife biologists attempted to locate and assess the bear's behavior to ensure the safety of the recovery team. Bear 211 was eventually spotted approximately 400 yards from the attack site, exhibiting normal feeding behavior and showing no signs of continued aggression or unusual activity. The formal recovery operation began at 1:32 p.m. and required the coordinated efforts of 8 park personnel, including rangers, wildlife biologists, and the park's technical rescue team. Martha's body was carefully documented and photographed in situ before being prepared for helicopter transport to the Flathead County Coroner's Office in Kalispell, Montana. The entire recovery operation was completed by 2:17 p.m., with the scene remaining secured for additional investigation activities. The investigation into Martha's death was led by Special Agent Robert Clearwater from the National Park Service's Investigative Services Branch, working in cooperation with Detective Sarah Blackhorse from the Flathead County Sheriff's Office and Dr. Ann Mitchell from the U.S. Geological Survey's Northern Rocky Mountain Science Center. The investigation team's mandate included determining the specific circumstances of the attack, identifying the individual bear responsible, assessing any contributing factors that might have led to the incident, and making recommendations for preventing similar occurrences in the future. The forensic examination of the attack site revealed several crucial pieces of evidence. The pattern of blood distribution, tissue fragments, and disturbed vegetation allowed investigators to reconstruct the sequence of events with remarkable precision. The location where Martha had initially encountered the bear was identified through the presence of discharged bear spray residue and the pattern of footprints preserved in a small patch of muddy ground near a seasonal stream crossing. Analysis of Martha's equipment provided additional insights into the attack sequence. Her bear spray canister was found approximately 12 feet from her body and showed evidence of having been discharged twice, with approximately 60% of its contents remaining. Her satellite communicator, which had been inadvertently activated during the initial moments of the encounter, had recorded nearly 7 minutes of audio data that provided investigators with unprecedented documentation of a fatal bear attack. The audio recording, while disturbing in content, offered valuable insights into bear behavior during predatory attacks. The recording captured Martha's initial calm responses to the bear encounter, the sound of the bear spray deployments, and the terrifying audio of the attack itself. Wildlife behavioral experts who analyzed the recording noted that the bear's vocalizations during the attack were consistent with predatory rather than defensive aggression, supporting the conclusion that Bear 211 had perceived Martha as prey rather than a threat. The search for Bear 211 began immediately following the recovery of Martha's body and continued for the next 4 days. The operation involved teams of park rangers, wildlife biologists, and specialists from Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, using a combination of ground tracking, aerial reconnaissance, and motion-activated trail cameras positioned throughout the bear's known range. The decision to locate and capture the bear was made based on established protocols for bears involved in fatal attacks on humans, which typically require the removal of the animal from the wild population. Bear 211 was finally located and captured on July 10th at 6:23 a.m. near Iceberg Lake, approximately 4 miles northeast of the attack site. The capture operation used a custom-made culvert trap baited with road-killed deer, a method preferred for its safety and effectiveness in capturing large bears without risking injury to wildlife personnel. The bear was tranquilized using a dart gun fired by Dr. Patricia Kim, a wildlife veterinarian with 15 years of experience in large carnivore management. The decision regarding Bear 211's fate was made following extensive consultation between park management, wildlife biologists, and legal counsel. While some advocacy groups argued for relocating the bear to a remote wilderness area, the consensus among wildlife experts was that bears involved in fatal attacks on humans pose an unacceptable risk for future encounters. Additionally, the size and age of Bear 211 made successful relocation unlikely, as large male grizzlies typically have difficulty establishing new territories and often attempt to return to their original ranges. Bear 211 was euthanized on July 11, 2024, at the park's Wildlife Research Facility. The necropsy performed by Dr. Kim revealed that the bear was in excellent health, with no signs of disease, injury, or abnormal behavior that might have contributed to the attack. Tissue samples were collected for genetic analysis and disease testing, all of which returned normal results. The bear's stomach contents confirmed that he had been feeding primarily on huckleberries and other natural food sources, with no evidence of human food or garbage consumption that might have led to habituation. The media response to Martha's death was immediate and extensive. The story was first reported by the Flathead Beacon, a local newspaper that had developed relationships with park personnel and often provided coverage of wilderness incidents. The initial report, published online at 3:47 p.m. on July 6th, was factual and restrained, focusing on the basic circumstances of the attack and the ongoing investigation. However, as the story was picked up by regional and national media outlets, the coverage became increasingly sensationalized. Cable news networks, in particular, focused on the dramatic aspects of the attack while often providing minimal context about the rarity of fatal bear encounters or the factors that contribute to such incidents. Social media platforms amplified the most shocking aspects of the story, with hashtags like Bear Attack and Glacier Park Danger trending nationally for several days following the incident. The sensationalized media coverage had immediate impacts on park visitation and local tourism. Campground cancellations exceeded 40% in the 2 weeks following Martha's death, and many hiking outfitters reported significant reductions in bookings for backcountry excursions. The economic impact on the local communities that depend on park tourism was substantial, with estimated losses exceeding $2.3 million during the peak summer season. Park officials responded to the media attention with a series of press conferences and educational initiatives designed to provide accurate information about bear safety and the statistical reality of bear encounters. Superintendent Jennifer Coleman, who had managed Glacier National Park for 6 years, emphasized that Martha's death represented the first fatal bear attack in the park since 1998, and that millions of visitors had safely enjoyed bear country experiences during that time period. The educational response included the development of enhanced bear safety presentations for visitors, updated signage at trailheads throughout the park, and expanded ranger programs focused on wildlife safety. The park also implemented temporary restrictions on solo hiking in certain areas with high bear activity, though these measures were controversial among wilderness advocacy groups who argued that such restrictions fundamentally altered the character of the wilderness experience. Martha's death also prompted a comprehensive review of bear management policies throughout the national park system. A panel of experts was convened to examine current protocols for bear-human conflict prevention, response procedures for wildlife attacks, and communication strategies for educating the public about wilderness risks. The panel's recommendations, published 6 months after Martha's death, included enhanced funding for bear research, improved training for park personnel, and the development of new technologies for wildlife monitoring and incident response. The legal proceedings following Martha's death were relatively straightforward due to the clear documentation of the circumstances and the absence of any negligence on the part of park personnel or systems. Martha's daughter, Sarah Phillips Chen, retained legal counsel to ensure that the investigation was thorough and that any systemic issues were identified and addressed. However, no legal action was taken against the National Park Service, as the incident was determined to be a tragic but unavoidable consequence of human activity in predator habitat. Sarah Phillips Chen established the Martha Phillips Wilderness Safety Foundation in her mother's memory, with a mission to support research into human-wildlife conflict prevention and to provide educational resources for wilderness recreationists. The Foundation's first major initiative was the funding of a 5-year research project examining the behavioral factors that contribute to rare predatory attacks by large carnivores on humans. The psychological impact of Martha's death extended far beyond her immediate family to include the broader community of wilderness enthusiasts who had followed her hiking adventures through her popular blog, 70 and Summiting. Martha had been documenting her retirement hiking experiences for nearly 3 years, building a dedicated following among older adults who were inspired by her adventurous spirit and practical approach to maintaining an active lifestyle into her 70s. The hiking community's response to Martha's death was complex and multifaceted. Many experienced hikers used the incident as an opportunity to review and enhance their own safety protocols, while others questioned whether the risks associated with solo hiking in predator habitat were justified regardless of experience level. Online forums dedicated to wilderness recreation were filled with lengthy discussions analyzing every aspect of Martha's final hike and debating what, if anything, could have been done differently to prevent the tragedy. For Tom Rodriguez, the wildlife photographer who had offered to accompany Martha on her final hike, the psychological impact was particularly severe. Despite rational understanding that Martha's decision to hike alone was entirely her own choice, and that his presence might not have prevented the attack, Tom struggled with intense feelings of guilt and regret. He took a 6-month leave of absence from his photography work and underwent counseling to process the trauma of knowing that someone he had met just hours before her death had died in such a horrific manner. The first responders who discovered Martha's remains and participated in the recovery operation also experienced significant psychological effects from the incident. Dr. Michael Torres, who had led the group that found Martha's body, reported persistent nightmares and anxiety about wilderness recreation for months following the incident. The park provided counseling services for all personnel involved in the response, and several rangers requested transfers to positions with less direct exposure to wildlife-related incidents. The long-term impacts of Martha's death on wilderness recreation patterns and policies continue to evolve more than a year after the incident. Statistical analysis of park visitation data shows that while overall visitor numbers have returned to normal levels, there has been a measurable shift toward group hiking and guided experiences, particularly among older visitors. Solo hiking permits in areas with significant predator activity have declined by approximately 25% system-wide, suggesting that Martha's death has had lasting effects on public perception of wilderness risks. Research initiatives funded by the Martha Phillips Wilderness Safety Foundation have begun to yield new insights into the factors that contribute to predatory attacks by large carnivores. Preliminary findings suggest that attacks are more likely to occur when bears are in hyperphagia, when environmental conditions limit visibility or scent detection, and when humans and bears encounter each other at distances that do not allow for appropriate behavioral responses by either party. The technological responses to Martha's death have included the development of improved personal safety devices for wilderness recreationists. Several companies have introduced enhanced satellite communicators with automatic emergency detection capabilities, while others have developed bear deterrent systems that combine multiple approaches, including sound, light, and chemical deterrents. The effectiveness of these new technologies remains to be proven through real-world application and scientific testing. Educational programs developed in response to Martha's death have been implemented throughout the national park system and in state parks across North America. These programs emphasize the statistical rarity of fatal bear encounters while providing practical information about risk reduction strategies. The programs also address the psychological aspects of wilderness recreation, helping visitors understand and manage the anxiety that can result from awareness of predator risks. The scientific legacy of Martha's death includes unprecedented documentation of a fatal bear attack through audio recording and forensic analysis. This data has contributed to a more detailed understanding of bear behavior during predatory encounters and has informed the development of improved safety protocols for wilderness recreationists. While tragic in its circumstances, Martha's death has provided valuable information that may help prevent similar incidents in the future. Martha Phillips was laid to rest on July 14, 2024, in Sunset Memorial Gardens in Billings, Montana, following a memorial service attended by more than 300 people, including former students, teaching colleagues, fellow hikers, and members of the broader outdoor recreation community. The service celebrated Martha's lifelong commitment to education, her passion for wilderness exploration, and her courage in pursuing an active lifestyle well into her 70s. The memorial service featured readings from Martha's hiking journal and blog posts, which revealed her deep appreciation for the natural world and her philosophical acceptance of the risks inherent in wilderness recreation. One passage, written just 2 weeks before her death, proved particularly poignant. "The mountains have been my greatest teachers, showing me both my limitations and my possibilities. If my time among these peaks should end suddenly, let it be known that every step was chosen freely and every sunrise was a gift beyond measure." In the months following Martha's death, her story has been featured in numerous articles, documentaries, and books examining the complex relationship between humans and wildlife in an increasingly crowded world. Her death has become a case study in wilderness management programs and a cautionary tale shared among hiking communities worldwide. Yet those who knew Martha best emphasize that she would not want her death to discourage others from experiencing the natural world she loved so deeply. The Grinnell Glacier Trail was reopened to hikers on July 20, 2024, following completion of the investigation and implementation of enhanced safety measures. A small memorial plaque was installed near the trailhead, honoring Martha's memory and serving as a reminder of the respect and preparation required for safe wilderness recreation. The trail continues to be popular among hikers, though many report that knowledge of Martha's death has added a soberness to their experience and a heightened awareness of their place in the natural ecosystem. Bear activity in the Many Glacier area returned to normal patterns following the removal of Bear 211, with multiple other grizzlies continuing to use the habitat for foraging and denning. Wildlife biologists emphasize that the death of one problematic bear does not significantly impact the overall bear population, and that the ecosystem continues to function as it has for thousands of years, with predators and prey maintaining their ancient relationships. The weather on July 6, 2025, exactly 1 year after Martha's death, was remarkably similar to the conditions on that tragic day: clear skies, moderate temperatures, and light winds from the southwest. Several dozen hikers completed the Grinnell Glacier Trail that day, many of them carrying bear spray and hiking in groups, demonstrating both the continued appeal of wilderness recreation and the lasting impact of Martha's story on hiking practices and safety awareness. Martha Louise Phillips, who had spent her career teaching mathematics to teenagers and her retirement exploring the mountains of Montana, had become in death a teacher once more, her final lesson written not in chalk on a blackboard, but in the collective memory of a community forever changed by her loss. Her story serves as both a reminder of the risks we accept when we enter the wild spaces of the world and a testament to the courage required to live fully in the face of an uncertain and sometimes dangerous world. The investigation into her death was officially closed on December 15, 2024, with no recommendations for changes to existing safety protocols or park management practices. The investigators concluded that Martha's death, while tragic, was the result of an extremely rare confluence of circumstances that could not have been predicted or prevented through reasonable safety measures. The report emphasized that Martha had followed established safety protocols and that her death should not be interpreted as evidence of inadequate park management or visitor education programs. As the seasons turn and new visitors arrive to experience the majesty of Glacier National Park, Martha's story continues to resonate through the hiking community and beyond. Her death marked not just the end of one remarkable life, but the beginning of ongoing conversations about risk, safety, and the price we sometimes pay for the privilege of experiencing the natural world in all its beauty and terror. In the end, perhaps that is the most fitting memorial for a woman who spent her final years teaching by example that a life fully lived requires the courage to venture beyond the boundaries of safety and comfort, even when the consequences of that choice might prove to be more than we bargained for.